So we're here again to continue yesterday's discussion about the mind, Buddha's take on the mind, and drilling down into the mind to identify the neurotic parts from the virtuous parts. They're like a big soup right now. We can't tell the difference. And the Buddha, and the reason for the Buddha to do this job, not to make ourselves miserable, because like a friend of mine said, as therapists, it's like having your hands in your own shit, and that is not comfortable. The only reason we do it is not to torture ourselves, but so that we can identify what causes the suffering so we can get rid of them, because that's what Buddha has found. These are adventitious, they say, not intrinsic to us, not at the core of our being. So we'll continue this discussion so we can take some tools from this, even if it's 1% of what you hear, put it into practice and listen to it as if you hadn't heard it before. Have a very open mind. That's important. Maybe we've heard it 1,000 times before. I've said it and heard it 10,000 times before, but every time I say it, I say it as if it's fresh, and I'm hearing it fresh, which is good. We need that. Otherwise, oh yeah, I know that. Then when they're locked, that's pride. Blocks us. No use. Hear it freshly, so that we can take some tools, so we can get rid of our suffering, because we are all fed up with suffering, so that then we can see that everyone's in the same boat, and we can also help them. This is the part. Compassion is the point, but it's not enough. As His Holiness says, you've got to have wisdom, and wisdom is what comes from deconstructing and unpacking and unraveling and reconfiguring your conceptual stories, the mind. That's the job. All the way to the long-term goal. Bodhisattvas think in terms of eons of achieving perfection. Quite literally, the Buddha's view is that, as nutty as it sounds to us. Buddhahood, so we can effortlessly be of benefit to others as long as time exists, with enthusiasm and wisdom and power. So that is a long way of putting the second two lines of this prayer, the motivation for why we're here together. And the first two lines are expressing, for those of us who figure we're already Buddhists, reiterating our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. And I'll sing that one time the prayer. I've said the prayer long in English, now I'll sing 2 times in Tibetan. Sangye chodang soke chognam la janchu badu dagmi kyapsu chi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog sangye chodang soke chognam la janchu badu dagmi kyapsu chi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog. All right. So as we've been discussing, just summarize. The Buddhist psychological model of the mind is describing the contents, and these contents he divides into 3 categories, and it's kind of fascinating because it seems so simple. It almost seems simplistic. There are the states of mind that are neurotic, deluded, all I-based, all fear-based. This is something interesting, and they cause us suffering and cause us to harm others. That's it. Then there's a valid, virtuous, appropriate, reasonable, useful, appropriate states of mind. There's anger, jealousy, depression, anxiety. Then there's love, compassion, kindness. We know these words intimately. We're intimately familiar because we see them in ourselves. And then the third lot, which we didn't go into much, I mentioned on Friday, they call them the neutral insofar as they're not negative, not positive, which is a curious categorization for us. And when we get that, we'll understand the neutral component. And that's why I like to call them the mechanics of our mind. They're the parts that make us function. Concentration, good memory, discrimination, the ability to distinguish this from that every millisecond. These are all working overtime that enable us to do the job of distinguishing between the neuroses and the virtues, lessening the neuroses and growing the virtues. That actually is the job of being a Buddhist from here to Buddhahood, surprisingly. I think it's all about watching the breath or walking slowly or something weird, not like that. I mean, that can help. But if walking slowly and talking slowly is the criterion of a Buddhist, that I'm done, I'm out of here. I'm a total failure. That's why I love it. The Dalai Lama speaks so fast. My friends who speak Tibetan, they say, you just can't understand him. He speaks so fast. He gets so intense. So that's a relief to think. It's okay. You can be a Buddha and talk fast. Okay. So we've discussed these so-called branch delusions. Like we looked at these three poisons. Anybody who's read any book at all will hear that. Buddhist view, these 3 poisons, these 3 toxic emotions. And these are like the summary, the root, the basis of all the other dramas. It's a very kind of articulate model, and they all kind of link to these 3. And within these three, there's a very intimate relationship, a hierarchical relationship. The root one, and we're going to get into that one today, is simply known as ignorance, Rigpa, unawareness. And there's various ways of describing that, but in terms of its being this root delusion, this root neurosis, it's so root, it's so primordial that it's actually taken the very thing that it posits, which is not accurate, Buddha says, an intrinsic, inherent, real, concrete, separate, solid, pointable, permanent, findable me, is a fantasy. But it's so primordial, it's virtually at the level of an assumption, and it underpins everything we think and do and say. And it underpins precisely the other delusion. So attachment, the next one, the simple word attachment, is the main voice of this ignorance. And this ignorance is about everything, how everything exists. This ignorance asserts, assumes, projects, believes in an intrinsic me and intrinsic everything else. And because this is not something we think we do, we weren't taught to do it, we don't discuss it like this in our modern culture, then it's an utter puzzle to us, you know. And the only reason it's a puzzle is because we so totally believe in it. Then it's just at the level of assumption. So to unpack it is not an easy job. This is why in the long term, in the Buddhist approach, we need to accomplish this amazing psychological skill called single-pointed concentration, you know, known in Sanskrit, as we know, as shamatha, Tibetan as shine, English as calm, abiding, this brilliant technique invented by these Indians well before the Buddha. Without this, finally, we can't get too far, but we've got to start somewhere. And of course, with this concentration technique, as we've been discussing, it enables us to access these subtler levels of our mind that we don't even posit as existing in the modern world. We completely subdue the grosser levels of sensory and conceptual. It's a whole nother level of reality for, you know, so we've got to posit this possibility. Here we're opening our minds to this possibility. I mean, this technique's been around for several thousand years. It's the basis of what people call mindfulness, which is sort of a name we give to this, a simple application of this technique. We need to access that subtle level of mind because these delusions are so primordial. To unpack and unravel, we have to start at the grossest level, and then you drill down ever deeper, ever deeper, ever deeper, ever deeper, ever deeper, you know, until we get to the root of these misconceptions and hear their story vividly and clearly and can prove logically that these have no basis. They are literally misconceptions. Like I've been saying yesterday, that we usually live at the emotional component. We live at the emotional level when the body's involved, and we're so addicted to our bodies, we make the body the boss, as Nami, as you said. We only notice, and this is the biggest failing we have in our modern culture, and we can start to change this, we can transform our lives. We only notice what the mind is doing when the body's shaking, when we feel it in the body. This is really true. You know, like you only notice the wheels and are not working on the car when they fall off. You haven't never noticed the wobbles. You just don't pay attention. You've never heard of such a thing. So that's how we are emotionally. We wait till the wheels fall off before we start to realize we've got a problem. And that's literally too late. Better than nothing, but too late. Damage control is the best. And so the common question we ask is, what do I do when I'm in the middle of a big fight with my husband or shouting at my kid? Well, that's the wheels falling off. And it's the best you can do is damage control. Better to have seen it days, weeks, months, years beforehand to get it, catch it at the conceptual level, and then you start to reconfigure it there, and then everything, you know, gradually we're moving towards that, and then everything, then what manifests through your body is something different. This is what you're trying to do as a Buddhist, know your mind intimately. But if you don't pay attention to it, you won't notice it until it's shaking. Then it's too late. Just literally. And that's our trouble in our culture. We only notice problems when it's too late, when the mind is shaking, when the body is shaking, when you want to kill yourself or kill your husband. Then I think we better sneak off to the therapist secretly, you know, isn't it? We're so ashamed. The Buddha's suggestion is we start observing the mind every day, and you get ever better at that, ever better, and therefore can drill down more and more and more before the body gets out of control. And that's why the very first level of Buddhism, first level, junior school, entry level, grade 1 Buddhist practice, surprisingly, is control the body and speech. control the servants of your mind. Then we won't harm anybody. Then we'll be miraculous. And it's easy to do the job of the mind. Easy then. So we looked pretty much in quite a bit at attachment and aversion yesterday, and this intimate relationship between them, this attachment, this emotion, this dissatisfaction, emotional hunger, the hankering, the manipulating, the expecting, and then the possessing, this whole spectrum of functions of attachment. The key heart function being an exaggeration of the deliciousness of the cake, the boyfriend, the handbag, the event, the thing, the sound, the smell, the taste, whatever, the objects of the senses, the so-called outside world. The assumption being that when I get that object, I'll get satisfaction. It'll fill up the gaping hole. Then there's aversion when it doesn't get what it wants. And it's a million times a day. We don't notice because it's mild. And then when it's volatile, it's called anger. When it's mild, it's called irritation, frustrated, upset, annoyed. And this is the trouble for badly behaved people like me. I had to learn, I'm still learning in my old age. It was it's naked. You can't pretend I didn't have anger, but some of you people don't show it. So you actually fool yourself as well, think you're not angry. Oh, I'm not angry. Well, yes, you are. It's just it's subtler and therefore harder to understand, harder to see, We understand that. And that's what it manifests as depression and despair. So we looked at those, these two. And then all the other dramas, we looked at pride and jealousy, for example, this overstatement, over-exaggerated sense of yourself, your importance, which we don't like to admit to. Then it's when it's deflated, the over-exaggeration of our ugliness, and that we love to admit to. I'm nothing, I'm nobody, I'm hopeless. And we all feel sorry for ourselves and each other. Oh, she's got such low self-esteem. And the shocking thing to remember is that we see the logic of it. You don't have low self-esteem if you don't have arrogance, because it's the flip side. It's an over-exaggeration of certain components of yourself. It's very personal. And it's always in reference to others. All these states of mind, all these conceptual stories are all together in a big soup, unedited, unidentifiable, because we've never paid attention to them. And then when we do pay attention to them, and this is with respect to our systems, our modern ways of seeing the mind, we pay attention to them, but only in terms of there being the response to something horrible out there. And we focus on the out there. We don't focus on the in here, because we then defend our right to be this way. I'm allowed to be depressed. Look at the world. I'm allowed to be angry. Look what Yogesh does to me. I'm allowed to be jealous. And analyze that part. It's very instinctive. This is the irony of ego. It's very defensive, self-pity. It's cruel to say this, but if we can see it, this is why we suffer. This is why we suffer. This is why we suffer. So the removing of, the lessening of these, the harnessing of these is the source of our happiness, quite literally for the Buddha. So now let's get to the root one. This is where we have to squeeze our brains, as Amiyeshi says. And it's usually a big leap to this one. Oh, get all excited. Oh, let's talk about emptiness, But it's the same principle as we've been discussing all the way through. There is a disturbing characteristic to attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, blah, blah, anxiety, you name it. But the key one we've been discussing here is the delusional aspect. And let us repeat this one again. This is initially hard to see. This is the key point Buddha's making. That the degree to which we're caught up in, let's say, attachment, this whole spectrum of its responses, of its symptoms, of its application, is the extent to which we're living in la-la land in relation to the object. So when you've got detachment glasses on, it's coming from this emotional lack of self, a lack of having something, this neediness, this emotional hunger. But then the bigger the emotional hunger, the more you feel you haven't got anything and aren't anything and don't have enough and not enough, the more hungry you are to get something out there. But you see through the lenses of your attachment, which then appear unbelievably divine. Attachment is like addiction. Attachment is the junkie mode. It's got subtler levels and grosser levels, definitely. And so the cake, simple example, as we've just talked, it's emotionally very intense. We don't notice that because we're so hungry about the cake. All we notice, think of the cake, analyze the cake, wait for the cake, get the cake, put the cake in the mouth, wait for happiness, and then suddenly 4 pieces later you want to vomit. And what happened? what happened, we don't follow. We wonder where the happiness went. And we forget tomorrow that you vomited from the cake, and then you try again. And we've been doing that for many lifetimes, Buddha says. We see this, we can recognize this, but it's just so addictive. We're so addicted to it. It's so programmed in our mind. It's so instinctive. To see the process, first of all, is important, so we can then unpack it, and go against it, argue with it, work slowly to deconstruct it, to stop believing. So what's the story that attachment is telling us? The story that attachment is telling us, first of all, is that I'm not enough. I don't have enough. Therefore, you have to hanker something out there. Then when you get, and because you've got the habit for chocolate cake, let's say, and so then you think of it, kind of, it gets exciting. Then you start to get it. You don't forget what you're doing, it's guaranteed. What was I doing there? Where was I going? Why was I coming to the shop? You don't forget chocolate cake. You might forget, you do other things, but you don't forget you're going for chocolate cake. You might forget people's names. I've not yet forgotten the name of chocolate cake. This is a really interesting point, isn't it? One time in Boston, my friend, Vikrant, he's an Indian fellow, he was upstairs sleeping and he had to get to the airport at 4 o'clock. And I woke up quickly and I realized he wasn't up. So I rushed to the bottom of the stairs. He's my friend. And I'm about to call out and I couldn't remember his name. I had to go to my contacts, in my Apple and find out his name. I mean, I could not believe it. I said, am I getting Alzheimer's or what? I told him, he didn't mind. Don't you all say, who was that person in that movie? That actor, that one, what was the name of that movie? We all kind of try to communicate. My grandmother, when I was little, she said, I said, because she kept forgetting things. She said, you'll forget things as you get older. I said, no, I won't. Yes, I do. Anyway, chocolate cake, don't forget that name. So then what happens is the key job of attachment is to over-exaggerate the deliciousness of that object on the plate. Now, we actually know this, but we never call it that. Therefore, we don't join the dots, And as Lama Zopa says, bad enough. Because this is the way the whole world appears to us, through the lens of these delusions. Forget the virtues, we're not discussing those yet. But as Lama Zopa says, bad enough that the world appears, the cake appears wrongly to us. And we're going to look into this, and we're going to get to the root one, which underpins this. But the killer is we believe it's true. We believe the cake is delicious, and we believe it will make me happy. And we believe if we don't get it, it's a panic attack. That's why it's so frantic. We understand this. And we're addicted to this process, and we believe totally. And so we're anticipating totally the pleasant feeling when the cake meets the mouth, meets the tongue, So where's the lie there? What's the lie? The lie of attachment. Okay, it is a chocolate cake. Tick the box, you're correct, it's a chocolate cake, it's not carrot cake. And it might even be the best chocolate cake. It might have won the blue ribbon at the, what do you call them in Australia? In Australia, we call it the Royal Melbourne Show. It used to be, everything was royal. Not here in this country, of course. The country fairs or something, those things. Well, it might even have won, it might even have won the blue ribbon for the best chocolate cake. You still argue professionally it could be the best chocolate cake. No argument. But attachment exaggerates its deliciousness because we're so hungry, emotionally hungry. So the more hungry you are, the more divine the object looks. And this hungry is a sense of nothing. I'm nothing and I'm nobody. I don't have enough and not even I am enough. So then the more divine the cake looks. It's like, and it's so attachment exaggerates the deliciousness. And then this is now the root delusion. Ignorance is underpinning that. They don't all function separately. They're very interconnected. Ignorance, this root delusion, is exaggerating the very ontological status itself of delicious chocolate cake. And that's completely seamless with its underpinning the attachment. They're both lies, but the ignorance is the root lie. Attachment is and we can see that the attachment one is easy to see. And we can prove it because 4 pieces later, the cake is on the plate, maybe half of it's missing because it's in your stomach. But we can see now, how does the half a cake look? Before, it looked so divine, you'd faint with pleasure. And the thought of not having it is horrifying. And now look at it. Not even cold yet. We know this experience. This is enough for us to prove emptiness. Because we're so addicted to believing this story, we just don't join the dots. We don't question it. And this is what we have to start doing, unpacking these misconceptions. And that ignorance is causing the delicious chocolate cake to appear, this is the lie of ignorance, to appear there, separate from me, on the plate, in and of itself, vibrating deliciousness. And it's completely, this is the real one, completely separate from me. I'm this innocent victim, empty, bereft. And this is utterly divine, and it's begging me to eat it. Separate from my mind, separate from me is the final lie. And this is hard to see because we say, well, of course it's separate. What are you talking about? Meaning that cake is there intrinsically, inherently, all these are the terms they use, in and of itself, in and of itself, from its own side, self-existently, naturally, intrinsically, all these are synonyms. It's there in absolute sense, and it's there in its own nature. And I'm just watching it. I'm this innocent victim. Look what the cake's doing to me. In other words, it appears as if my mind has nothing to do with the cake. This is the final lie. This is the subtlest lie. In fact, the Buddha says, everything, this is too dramatic for us to hear, everything comes from the way, everything exists in terms of how we see it. I mean, simple examples like the cake itself, this is not the subtlest meaning, but it's getting there. We know logically 4 pieces later, when you've stuffed yourself with 4 pieces and now you're stuffed, and how now does the cake appear to you? Totally disgusting. I mean, this is enough to prove this point that nothing has an intrinsic nature, that everything is in terms of how you label it. This is the simplest example, the simplest example. So we see the whole world on the basis of this assumption of everything having an intrinsic nature. We see everything in a very concrete, absolute way. And then the branch delusions, we run between these 2 1,000 times a day. These are the 2 fundamental ones, attachment and aversion. The whole world appears to us either as delicious or as ugly, broadly speaking. So when the thing satisfies your needs, you call it delicious. When Yogesh is kind to me and loving to me, he appears divine to my attachment eyes. But when he starts to not look at me and be mean to me and shout at me and cheat on me, how does he appear now? Same fellow. If I give you a photo of Yogesh yesterday when I thought he adored me, and I give you a photo of Yogesh today when I know he's cheated on me, so yesterday was divine and love and attachment, today is fury and rage. You know you won't see the difference. There's not a fraction of difference, but look at in my mind the difference. So we see the entire world through these lenses. And we believe in this. We believe in the story. And everybody, monkeys and dogs and ants, everybody's driven by this, the Buddha says. All sentient beings, driven by these misconceptions. And this is the source of it. What happened? Who's talking to me? Nobody. Okay, it's fine. So this is what we have to unpack, you know. I mean, the Tibetan monastic university system, they spend several years leading to this, and then they study the Madhyamaka and the middle way view about emptiness, about this for several years, you know, intensively. So let's look at it. So it's on this point too, on this point about the nature of self and of everything else, this final nature, where Buddha diverged from the other brilliant Indian yogis and scholars and meditators and thinkers. He said they didn't go far enough. So then Buddhism, so the really nice way, there are many ways, many logical arguments, many debates and logical arguments you use at our conceptual level in order to unpack and unravel this one to get to the subtle one. You can't just dig deep. You can't go straight to the subtle one. You can't just leap into understanding E equals MC squared, can you? You've got to go through the stages of 1 + 1 is 2 and then getting more complicated as you go. It's a very natural, logical process. Same here. So one really nice way to see how things finally exist, the term for it is emptiness of intrinsic existence, it's shorthand. Even the word emptiness is shorthand. Is to see it in terms of how they exist conventionally as well. So the Buddha will talk about how everything that exists has a final way of existing, an ultimate way. And the shorthand is emptiness. It's like saying E equals MC squared. Oh, I can say that. I passed my exam. Now explain it. Oh, I see. That's different. So same here, isn't it? We can say the word emptiness. We're going to unpack it. So then the relative reality is called dependent arising. It's a usual term, or dependent origination. Different terms you hear. Interdependence. So whatever's existing, the universe, has these two ways of existing. And the way to understand the ultimate one is in terms of the relative one. This is the best way. This is the best way to prevent us from falling to the abyss of the great mistake, as Tsongkhapa says. Because when we hear the word emptiness, when we hear the word emptiness, you read a bit of Buddhist psychology, you read, these terms, Buddhism, immediately, naturally, the word conveys to us nothingness. And instinctively, psychologically, philosophically, in our bones, that's how we hear it. And that's a mistake. So it's more nuanced, way more nuanced than that. So, okay, let's look at these two truths the Buddha says. So first of all, when you study Buddhist philosophy, you study the texts, and you learn this kind of worldview of the terminology that's used to refer to that which exists and how things exist. So one of the very first things you learn is the different terms for that which exists. And why is Buddha talking about that which exists? Because he says we're not in touch with that which exists, and that's why we suffer. So his final goal is this wisdom to be in sync with how things exist. It's not how we think in daily life, So there are several synonyms. Object of knowledge, established base, existent, some of the terms. And what's interesting, this is showing the centrality of mind in Buddhism. The definition of an existent is that which can be cognized by mind. So the implication is a valid cognition. And there's a whole way of describing that in Buddhist psychology. So this is incredible. It's axiomatic for the Buddha that which exists is that which can be cognized by mind. That's what defines it. This is shocking to us in our modern scientific world. Like I said, psychology is in the lowest in the totem pole. It's like a soft science, we think. It's the exact opposite for the Buddha. So we're trying to get in sync with that which exists. That's wisdom, finally. Finally, that's wisdom. And that's what brings happiness and stops suffering. And then we combine that with compassion and empathy, and that's the two wings of the bird. The bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. That's Buddhahood. Okay, so now there are different levels at which things exist interdependently, and Buddha's way of presenting, there are three main ones, and these are arguments with the views that he came out of, that he has discovered to be not true. So the first one is the positing of an intrinsic, uncaused, unchanging self. In Sanskrit, they call it the Atman or something, or Pali. In the Christian view, it's called a soul. It's an intrinsic, kind of special, permanent thing. And of course, it's something given to you when the Creator makes you. Well, there's no view like that in Buddhism. There's no such thing as a creator. He would argue with it. He's not being argumentative and mean. He's showing his logical proof, which we have to go through in our meditation and our logic and then meditation to prove we don't need a creator. It's an unnecessary, it's something we've imposed. From the point of view of its being a philosophy, it's implying that something can exist without being caused. And the same with the soul or the self. And the way we might not think soul, but we all think I, self. And we all assume it's somehow the boss in there, it's like a creator of me, runs the show. There's an assumption, isn't it? It's very deep. And so it's the same philosophical view as some intrinsic, uncaused boss of the universe. It's a dualistic view for the Buddha. There's no such thing. So the realization of that is what the realization of emptiness finally gets you to. One of the implications of it. So the first argument is, and this is where karma is a brilliant discussion, a brilliant antidote, a brilliant argument, debate with this view of an intrinsic, uncaused me. So look at how we feel, like I said before. We feel like this innocent victim who got plonked on this planet always by someone else. If you're a Christian or you're a materialist, the one thing both philosophies share is that someone else made us. It's a very interesting concept, isn't it? Buddha says no such thing. It's not viable. You don't need to be made by anyone. In fact, it's the weirdest idea for the Buddha, that someone can give you, make you, actually mold you and separate you and plonk you on the earth. A nutty idea. Mummy gives you a body and daddy, no problem, but not your mind, not your feelings, not your emotions, not your tendencies. You bring these with you in your mind. Don't need creating by someone else. So this view is really what's underneath the karmic one. It brings a sense of responsibility for your happiness and your suffering. It's tremendous when we really understand it. And that is arguing with this sense of an uncaused me. When you realize that you are the source of, your own causes are the source of you, not someone else. Innocent victim model, no such thing. Now, the second one is the one, let's just go into this one. And this leads us to the subtlest one. These are views of dependent arising. So the second one is a very delicious one. So there's various phenomena that exist. There's a computer, there are a pair of glasses, there's a cloth, there's a mug, trillions and trillions of phenomena in the universe. We can see this. So before we start to discuss how they exist, we need to first establish their existence. So what do? You label it something. You always use my example of a mug. What's that, mummy? Well, it's called a mug, darling. That's the name. Now you have to say what it is, please. And that's a really interesting point. Well, what is it, mummy? Well, you can see it's this flat. The first part of the definition is this conventional characteristics. It's flat-bottomed, a clay container. You can get to see that, but I'm not satisfied yet. And this is a really major point to understand emptiness, when we get to understand emptiness. But what's it do? What is its meaning? What is it? Oh, I see. Well, it holds my tea. It keeps my tea. It holds my tea. That's its function. But don't believe her. We'll believe anything anyone tells us, You get her to prove it, please. You've got to prove it. This is not reality coming from the sky. This is reality that we've established. And so she put her tea in there and I'll see it won't leak out. So she just proved it holds my tea. There's still not enough. We've got to then make sure within this world that we exist in, that label, mug, and that definition is not contradicted by another label, another mug, another definition somewhere else. Once we've established this, we can tick the box and we all agree, shake hands. Now we can discuss how a mug exists. So remember attachment and aversion. Forget ignorance, but remember attachment and aversion. Now I'll tell you, even with my glasses off, that cup appeals to me. The shape and color, especially not so much the shape, but the color appeals to me. But remember, he said, that's just my eye consciousness. And then in a millisecond, my mental consciousness, the workshop, is then accessed and up comes a nicely designed cup, because that's my opinion about it. And that's seen through the lenses of attachment. So my attachment over exaggerates its deliciousness. That's one way it doesn't exist. This is showing us how we don't see things as they exist. We get it right that it's a mug. We get it right when we label that color. But the attachment exaggerates its deliciousness. So I think about it, I want to touch it, I get scared it'll break. One of the signs of attachment, this is very, 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 very humbling, is when you think about something when it's not there. Check your mind. We live in another world. We live thinking about either things we hate or the things we want, thinking about. And in fact, we feel depressive when it's nothing delicious to think about, nothing to think about that you've got, nothing to anticipate, wait to see your baby, wait to see your wife, wait to go here, wait on the pilgrimage, wait on that, go next week, have this lunch, dinner, where one of the functions of attachment is endlessly projecting into the future. And we get depressed if there's nothing to think about, nothing to look forward to. That's attachment. Very scary to think of not having that. So attachment exaggerates the status and deliciousness of this cup. And then when suddenly Yogesh had given it to me, and I adore it, because all I do is see Yogesh, and now he cheats on me, I'll smash the thing immediately because I loathe it. We know this, don't we? We know this. So it's clearly coming from our mind, isn't it? Same mug, same colors, but different interpretation. Depends on whether, depends on all these things. So it's so clearly contingent, on the mind, labeling it. This is clear from attachment. The ignorance one is more subtle, same as the cake. So anyway, we're going to discuss the object called self. There's various synonyms for this object. It's called self, I, person. So a dog is a person, an I or a self. A Buddha is a person, a hell being is a person, a spirit is a person, an ant is a person. These are terms that are used to refer to sentient beings, or beings in general, including Buddhas. It's a term referring to this type of phenomenon that exists. So let's look at how this ignorance in the mind causes us to believe in this, to believe in the way we exist. Okay, so the second, this is the second now, the second level of dependent arising. The first one is that things come, the self comes into existence and depends upon causes. The second one is the self and everything else in the universe exists in dependence upon its bits and pieces. Well, we kind of get that. That's made of bits and pieces. Everything's made of bits and pieces, you know. And everything you can touch is made of bits and pieces. But here Buddha's arguing, one of the prevailing views before that, about there's a self that does exist, that doesn't, that's partless and unitary and permanent somehow. Buddha says not possible. So you have to argue with it and look at this. It's not viable. Something like that can't exist. So just speaking a little bit, so, okay, let's look then how we think about I and what's valid and what's not. How does the I exist? So ignorance, this Rigpa, when it's related to the I as opposed to the computer or the mug, we can label it ego grasping. It's just, all the delusions have a sense of incredible grasping, and they're fear-based, panic-stricken, all of them. Why? It's very simple, because what they're clinging at doesn't exist. It's kind of weird to hear that. That's why when you've rid the mind of this nonsense and you've realized emptiness, there is no fear. The mind is radiant, blissful. So this ignorance causes, self-ego grasping causes us to believe 1,000,000,000% that in here, somewhere, as my friend Pende says, walking hand in hand with all the other bits and pieces, the nose, the pee-pee, the caca, the knee, the third eyelash, the ear, the eardrum, the billions of pieces that make up this component, this person, that we believe utterly and completely and intrinsically and totally and completely that there is a piece in there walking hand in hand with all the other pieces. That's a very special piece with a capital I, and it's called I. Our language expresses this. So what to do is lots of logical arguments to debate with this, and this is at the grossest level, in order to be able to get the experience at a subtle level of the truth of this, finally, to see the truth of it, which is when we finally remove all the nonsense, cut the root of suffering. So I like to use the example of IKEA. It's a great example. The normal way that Buddha would get us to do the debate is to take the whole package now and then to unpack. You do this serious meditation where you're literally looking for this I. Buddha's telling us, Robina, there is no separate I in there. This is only one way in which the mistake we make. There is no separate I, but it's not enough to hear it, because we totally primordially believe it, act as if, totally believe it. Everything is based on that. Our suffering for many lifetimes is based on that. So we've got to argue with it. We've got to deconstruct it. We've got to use logic to deconstruct it. So the way to normally do is you unpack. Is it here? Is it there? So you almost like you put all the contents in front of you, piles of all your bits and pieces of mind, piles of all your bits and pieces of your body, because you're waiting to find the piece called I. Well, the other way to do it is go to IKEA. You go online, you see a nice yogesh. Oh, I'll buy one of those, you know. When you get a shock because you get a box, don't you? With millions of bits in it. You've got to create your own yogesh. It's a very nice argument. This one is a good way to do the analysis. So naturally, you're building the yogesh, or just put your own name there. And as you're putting on the feet, you know, and IKEA know how to build one. They don't give you 17 toes and you just cross your fingers. They don't give you 5 eyes and, you know, only one hand. You get the right number of bits and pieces. They know how to construct an eye. You get the right shape and color. You look it up, you know, 6'6". How tall are you? 4. 6 foot. I'm sorry, he's only 6'4". And Indian race, you know, male with all the bits and pieces that males get. Like if you want a girl one, you get a shock if you see the wrong organs, you know. You get the right bits. IKEA gives you the right bits. And we know they've constructed one already, so they know what needs to make up a yogesh. Now, as you're putting the pieces together, you're eagerly, anxiously, worriedly looking, waiting for the piece in the little Ziploc bag that's labeled I. Because we believe it has to be there. That's the one that makes you real. It's like the switch to turn on. Now it's real. And Buddha will say you won't find one. Because guess what? You don't need one. Because you know why? Because the bits do just fine functioning as Yogesh. This is the final conclusion. I'm going to get there yet. But Yogesh is merely a name that you give to this whole package. But we assume there's an intrinsic Yogesh in there. Everyone, this is the source of all suffering, of all sentient beings in all the realms of existence since the beginning of this time. Buddha says. He's found this to be so. And it's deep in there. So we've got to do this analysis. So let's just do a little bit of argument to try and show how you don't need this extra piece. It sounds so silly to say you don't need an eye, you know? So, you know, it's like, okay, look at our conceptual language. I will say to you, I have a mug and I have a mala. Now, if that's a true statement, this is really important. This is one debate they call single or plural, one or many. You've got to, if something exists, it's either one or it's more than one. It sounds so absurd to us. We've got to do this analysis to see it. So I will tell you a statement. I have a mug and a mala. Now, if that's a true statement, as you're looking at me and as you're hearing my words, you're checking that I spoke the truth. So straight away, you will see it's true. Now, if you count the number of phenomena I just mentioned, mala, eye, mug, you agree it's 3, isn't it? And if that's true, simply at this simple level, you have to be able to show that there is a mug that does not exist in dependence upon the eye, meaning it doesn't depend, it's separate from the eye. That you break the mug, Robina's still intact. Well, she might have a panic attack if she still adores Yogesh. But a mug's existence doesn't depend upon the existence of Robina, nor does it depend upon the existence of a mala. If the mala breaks, the mug is fine, Robina's fine. If Robina drops dead, the mug is fine, unless she's not holding it, of course. And so they all don't depend upon each other. They're separate and independent phenomena. Easy to see. Now we'll say a slightly more nuanced point. I have a nose and an ear. Now, without analysis, you will see that's true. But we have to analyze because we are assuming we're assuming something, and you're going to see this. So if it's the same argument as here, if this is a true statement, conventionally, you have to point out 3 separate phenomena, that each of which doesn't depend upon the other. So an ear to function, to listen, doesn't need a nose, not, you know, simply speaking. And a nose to breathe doesn't need an ear. The ear could go deaf, nose is fine. They're separate and independent, simply, easily, not too complicated. So that's 2 of the phenomena. Now, where's the 3rd one? We say it with enormous conviction. I am the owner of an ear and a nose. So that's what we have to look for. Buddha says you won't find one. It's just a convention. It's just a name, but it's just a way of talking. It's a convenient way of talking. But we give this immense status. We put bells and whistles on the eye. And so we assume it's in there somewhere. It refers to something. And when you know, like if someone says, you know, and like Yogesh insults me, he says, you're sick of your nose, Robina. How dare you insult me, I'll say. He'll say, Robina, I didn't insult you, I insulted your nose. And we laugh at that. Well, it's all me. This is the other example. We either think there's an eye that's separate, that runs the show like a puppeteer, or we think all of it is me. Well, you have to argue with that as well. As Lama Zopa says, the label I can't be the base, which is the parts. It can't be. If I is the nose, then I is equal to nose. They're synonymous and you won't find a difference. So nose is nose and nose is eye and eye is eye and eye is nose. That means I have an eye or I have a nose. And then if you have an ear, there's another eye. And you have something else, another eyelash, you have another one. You've got millions of eyes. I mean, these 2 seem absurd arguments to us, like splitting hairs, being clever, mother. You know, it's not just intellectual cleverness. Because this ego grasping believes there is a separate I, and then believes, and other times, that all of me is the I. So we've got to argue with these concepts because these concepts are deep in the bones of our being. And this is how primordial. Once we have seen in the depth of our samadhi concentration, eventually after years and years, if not lifetimes of practice, of deconstructing and arguing and debating, once we finally see subtly for the first time that there never has been, isn't, and never could be that kind of I, that's the realization of emptiness. From that second, you've got more work to do, From that second, you've cut the root of all suffering. And you can't fall back after that. We've had samadhi in countless lifetimes, Buddha says. We've never used it to realize emptiness. So we're talking something subtle here. So if there were, another argument, if there were a piece called I, you get the Ziploc bag, oh, thank God, there it is, your I. Phew, I thought they might have missed it out, you know. I'm going to ring up IKEA, where's my I? And you put it in, and then suddenly the I turns, and yoga starts functioning. Like it's a dead body until then, you know. The I is the bit that makes us all work. But if there were a piece that's in its own Ziploc bag, alongside the piece in another Ziploc bag called right knee, and then called left, third eyelash to the left on the left eye, whatever, all these millions of parts. If there were a piece that's called I in its own Ziploc bag, then it is separate from the others. So when my knee hurts and I go to the doctor, I'm in pain. Well, get real, Robina. Which bit's you in pain? Your eye is in pain or your knee is in pain? Make up your mind. We'll just get confused. Well, it is me. This is what we think the eye is the knee. Or if then Yogesh insults my nose and I say, don't insult me, he says, no, I'm not insulting the eye, I'm insulting your nose. And there's the eye in here going, oh, phew, thank God, and, you know, Yogesh left me out of it, phew. I mean, this sounds ridiculous, right? But this is the logical arguments. If there were a one that is there that's separate, which we think there is, which we didn't think we thought, we just assumed it. What are you talking about? It's like, sounds like ridiculous talk, you know. So the word emptiness simply is a shorthand, or it's another word for absent, not existing. So what isn't? What is it that isn't existing? The intrinsic I. Now, this is where we get to the final conclusion. There is, we finally do conclude, we finally conclude that Yogesh is the label, just the name. It's very flimsy. It's the name we put upon the parts. It's merely labeled Yogesh. Then, they say, we finally realize dependent arising. As His Holiness Dalai Lama says, the I is not empty of existing intrinsically because you can't find it. And I'm saying it here, and you won't find it. That's not the real premise, he says. The I is not existing from its own side because it's a dependent arising. That's the final one that you realize when you realize the two truths. So there is an I. Emptiness. As Lama Zopa says, when you finally realized this, that there has never been, isn't, and never could be, that kind of I that's intrinsic, independent, inherent, existing from its own side, in and of itself, blah, blah, blah. When you know utterly from the depths of your being and the subtlety of your samadhi for the first time, there isn't and can't be such an I. That's emptiness. But he says there is an I, dependent arising. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't. This is yogis talking, this is from experience. So right now, Buddha says, we're completely entrenched in the two truths, the two mistakes, the two mistaken views, the two extreme views. So when we hear emptiness, we throw the baby out with the bathwater and hear nothingness. Then we hear dependent arising, we get all overexcited and we grasp, oh, thank God there is something, grasp. And we sort of like, Buddha, make up your mind, mate. Is there an I or is there not? Because we think they're the only options. But it's more nuanced than that, more subtle. And the middle way is right bang when these two come together. Finally, when you're an enlightened being, you realize the emptiness of the I and simultaneously the merely labeled I together. That's the actual middle way. So being on track with the two truths until we start, usually it's like, oh my God, everything's empty. Oh, well, don't bother then. If there's no I, who cares? That's nihilism. And that's, we immediately run into this. We fall into the abyss of the great mistake, as Tsongkhapa says. It's automatic. It happens because in the bones of our being, this ego grasping thinks that. And we become despairing. And then when we think there is something, we grasp mightily and see it as eternalistic and permanent and, of course, inherent. These are the two extreme mistakes. And we go like two drunken sailors between these two 1,000 times a day. And emotionally, this is all the excitement of attachment. And this is the depression of like nothingness, despair, no light at the end of the tunnel, might as well kill myself. They're like the emotional expressions of these two extremes. These are descriptions of how the mind works, not something Buddha has imposed upon the mind. He hasn't made these views up. He's observed this is how we function, and this is why we suffer. This is the subtlest lie, the most pervasive, the most utter. So what's the implication of this? Sounds exciting. Well, guess what? You'll be joy, happiness, pleasure, like we said yesterday, is one of the natural characteristics of a mind to the degree that it's unencumbered by delusions. It's so simple for the Buddha. Like I said yesterday, as far as we are concerned, the Buddha's telling us, this is samsara, we think happy feelings are what we get when we get what attachment wants. That's samsaric philosophy. He says, no, I've discovered that what happiness is naturally is what you'll end up with once you've given up attachment and all the delusions. So the mind is naturally joyful and naturally virtuous. The virtuous states of mind are at the core of our being. Why? Because they're in sync with reality to some degree or another. They're in sync with dependent arising. They're reality, they're natural. Delusions are adventitious. They're unnatural in a sense, insofar as that you can get rid of them. They're natural insofar as we've all got them, yeah. What we mean by natural, you've got to have them, otherwise you're weird. Other way around for the Buddha. This is the root delusion. So in terms of the three levels of suffering, like we talked yesterday in the Four Noble Truths, you get rid of the first kind of suffering by abiding by the laws of karma. Stop killing, stop lying, stop stealing, because they prevent, that stops future suffering. That's the grossest level of suffering. They stop eventually. Junior school, entry level, grade 1 teachings. Next level of practice, middle scope, high school, I call it, you get to the mind, and by giving up attachment, you give up the suffering of change, like we talked. Now here, when you realize emptiness, you give up all pervasive suffering. And you quit samsara. And you add bodhicitta, and you become Buddha. So the consequence of this is fearlessness. I mean, this is a very curious one, but they say fear. You know, sometimes they talk about the fears of samsara. It's a term they use in Buddhism. Samsara is the word that's used in Sanskrit to refer to being caught up in this nonsense. That's all it means. For some place where you're allowed to have sex and drugs. You've got to give up to go to some boring place called nirvana. Not like that. Samsara is being caught up in the delusions, believing in this philosophy. And the consequence of giving it up is you're the beneficiary. That's what we just don't hear. We just hear it as punitive and Buddha's being mean to us. No, he's giving us the method to stop suffering and get happy. So as you get rid of delusions, you get more happy just naturally. It's just a natural consequence. My mother, a Catholic, she used to say, virtue has its own rewards. That's what Buddhists say. Whereas we think of happiness like a gift from God. You're a good girl, you get rewarded. That's why we crave to be seen to be a good girl. Oh, mummy, I made my bed. You know, oh, you're a good girl. Oh, now I feel better. That's our dualistic view of needing approval. That's how deep it is. We want a boss, God or mummy or the government or policeman or the audience to clap. You did a good job, Robina. Talking to Jamie, the director of the thing happening in BAM, and he said, of course, that's what actors are. You live, I mean, the slightest shift in the audience response, you're going to be having a panic attack on the stage, because and so it's almost impossible to act just in yourself, to act the part, whether the people love you or hate you. We crave that response to the subtlest degree. When you're with a partner, I'm watching Yogesh like a hawk every second, aren't I? The moment he walks in the door, he looks slightly not happy. I have a complete panic attack, like it's personal against me. What have I done wrong? He's just thinking about his boss, not me, but I take it personally, don't I? That's the craving for attachment. That's attachment to being approved of, because we don't think we exist until someone says, clap, clap, That's how desperate, neurotic we are. Now I forgot what that brought that on. I forget. So anyway, have some questions before I go to the next, discussing the word emptiness itself, and so we don't get so confused. Any questions in there? Sunny?
No.
No questions? Any questions in the room? Yes.
I have questions.
Who's, just hang on a second. Who's there? Whose eye? Which eye is this?
It's me.
Which eye
It's me. It's my. It's me,
Eye?
Venerable.
I don't know which me is.
It's
Don't say
Nana.
it.
You don't see me.
Good,
Eye.
say your name, Nana. We've all got an eye, but we have to know the name. Or Nana in Portugal. Okay. And Nana is a Ukrainian. She's Ukrainian. Go on, dear.
Yes, I have a question from yesterday, actually. Okay. Let's say if Ukrainians killing Russians, they create tons of negative karma of killing. And
Depends
if
on your motivation.
Hmm?
Depends on your motivation.
Right. And if I
Just make the question more abstract, more theoretical, not personal. Just keep it
like,
simple.
okay,
Just
like,
keep it-
okay, I'm donating to Ukrainian army. Am I supporting killing?
Well, what the hell do you think?
I
mean,
think
prove it.
yes, but it's like a right thing to do.
Nana,
Yes,
one step at a time. I'm not giving any judgment yet, but you asked me a fairly evident question. If I give money to a gun company, am I supporting using guns? Well, it's sort of obvious. So if you're giving money to an army to kill people, then obviously you're supporting killing. But sweetheart, that's the fundamental thing of karma. It comes with the intention and the motivation. So why can't you give money to the medical part of the army? That might be more precise and better, for God Almighty's sake.
yes, I thought about it.
Well, then, okay, then keep it simple and be reasonable. You don't want to support killing of anybody just because you don't want to pollute your mind with killing, do you not? You don't want that, do you?
No,
Well, sweetheart, you want to
not at all.
You want to support love and kindness and healing. So support, if you're going to join the army, join the medical corps. Very simple. It's not complicated, Nana. Just protect yourself. You've got to protect yourself first. That's the wisdom wing. You've got to watch your body and speech and mind like a hawk and try to avoid doing things. And listen to this, that will produce future suffering for you, Nana. This is what we're always forgetting about karma. It's sort of like you want to become a nutritionist. And that's compassion, right? You want to help other people. You agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you want to help other people with nutrition, what's your first step?
Learn about it, right?
Thank you very much. And start working on yourself, right? Proving it to yourself that
Yes.
it works, right? So when you eat the good
Yes.
food and stop eating the bad food, what's your first reason? What's the basis of the first reason?
I'm feeling good myself.
Not feeling good, healing yourself, making yourself useful. Then you can help others. So everything you
Okay.
put in your mouth, you necessarily will put in your mouth only the food that will make you a healthy person. You agree? You agree?
Yes.
Well, here the same with the
Yes.
wisdom ring. The long-term goal of everything is to benefit others. But the wisdom ring is specifically about putting yourself together, mental nutrition. So why would you want to do an action and have a thought that would support killing, where that would only bring suffering to you in the future? Why would you want to do that?
Yes. I don't want to do that.
Well, then, okay, all I'm doing is not telling you what to do. I'm giving you the logical thinking. That if
Yeah,
you'd like-
yeah, I understand,
if
Lama,
you'd like to
completely.
adopt it, that's up to you.
Completely. Just it feels like a right thing to do, I guess. Well, it's not the right thing to do.
You have to think it through, Nana.
Thank you.
I'm not forcing you to believe or not believe. Think it through. As this is the point that we often not think about in the West, is we have to use logic to argue with our feelings and our thoughts and our emotions. And we have to finally prove what is a valid action, what is a non-valid action, what is karma, what is not, what are the components of an action. You've got to be very precise, Nana. So if you're a
Yes,
bodhisattva,
ma'am.
honey, if you're a bodhisattva and have got wisdom and compassion, you can do what you damn well like, because you've got power and wisdom and compassion. But if you haven't, you have to be cautious to protect yourself. Forget protecting other people.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
What can I do? People call me ma'am. I must act like a ma'am. Yeah, okay, then here we'd go. I don't know how I say your name, baby. How do I say your name?
It's perfect. That's exactly how you say it. It's
Merwood.
very simple. Merwood, yeah.
Okay, is that Welsh or something?
Or something. It's really, it's older than that.
Okay, go Merwood. Talk to me.
If we understand or we accept both of these descriptions when we're talking about emptiness, on the one hand, the name we assign to a thing describes its function. So conventionally,
No, not quite. The name we give to a thing, and then you have to assert its function. You label it first, then you give the definition, which includes its function, to be more precise.
okay, that's more precise, but ultimately.
Wait a minute, Yogesh is the label. You
Yeah.
can't see, but he's next to me over here. There he
Yes.
is.
We
Wrong.
see him, yeah.
There he is. Oh, no, wrong
Hi,
way.
Yogesh.
There he is. I can't get there. It's no good. It's difficult. I can't. Got the wrong way. This way.
Okay,
This way.
yeah, there he
There
is.
he is.
Hello.
That's Yogesh, okay? That's Yogesh.
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So now, that's the label we have to, and this is the
Yes.
point we're getting to later, and we'll discuss more. There's a name, but the name just can't float in the sky, can it? It has to be put
No.
upon something, doesn't it? Which is called the base for the label. And the base for the label are the parts over here sitting all together that we bought in IKEA recently, all melded together. They're the parts. They're the base of the label. So the name is Yogesh, and he functions as the person called Yogesh. Yes. So then go on.
Okay. And the other thing we accept, or at least intellectually understand, is that there is no inherent I. We can understand from your descriptions and thinking about this, there can be no inherent independent I. Okay, if we
I that's separate from those parts.
Yes, if we intellectually, yeah. So I think I can grasp both of those concepts, but what's the penny drop? When do you get to the point where you actually understand emptiness?
How do you might know the meaning of the musical theory and you play it for the first time, you got it down, haven't you? But what's the answer to how you perfect it and make it totally experiential?
Years.
No, you just keep practicing.
That's what I mean.
It's not complicated. But we're so not used to thinking that you start with these thoughts and then internalize them by thinking them until they become natural. You think them until they become internalized. But we do know it when it comes to science and music. You know the answer. You wouldn't ask the answer. Well, now I understand, the theory of music. What do I do next? You internalize it by practicing, honey. It's not complicated. You just got to be patient and skillful.
So your suggestion is to look at every single thing, just keep going over this and just view life this way over and over and over again until you get it.
Until eventually, you finally can only get emptiness in the subtlety of single-pointed concentration. You start at the gross level, you use logical analysis, it becomes more and more effective, more and more natural to you, becomes more and more real. And don't even underestimate intellectual conviction. Maybe you say you put it together for a moment. We've got to start somewhere, darling. But then you get, with more and more thinking and analysis and application every day, it becomes very strong. It becomes inferential certainty. That's a really powerful level of realization, and it's still intellectual, but don't underestimate that level of intellectual certainty. That's powerful. And then eventually in single point of concentration, you will see the truth eventually at the subtlest level of your mind, beyond conceptual, beyond sensory. And that will be the first moment of a non-conceptual direct insight into the reality that there never has been, isn't, and never could be, that kind of I. Slowly, it's a process. We say practice makes perfect. Tibetans say it beautifully. They say nothing ever gets more difficult with practice. That's good, isn't it?
Okay.
That's why if you don't get it right first conceptually, you'll be up a garden you can't be up a garden without a paddle. What are you? You're up a garden path. You've got to have the words right. It's obvious. If you keep thinking 1 + 1 is 3, you'll never realize it until the cows come home, because it's not right.
Right.
That's why it's so important. And that's what we don't do. It's all these clever intellectuals in the West. We all just make things up and read it once or twice. And then we write our own version of emptiness, thinking we're so clever. We haven't even begun to think about it properly. And there are, even in Buddhism, there are many ways of understanding emptiness. Buddha taught many ways in relation to the levels of minds. So it's really demands intellectual certainty, intellectual clarity, using your noggin. debating, analyzing intellectually, and then slowly that leads to an insight, and they build up in meditation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mhm.
Fernando, hello, sweetheart.
Hello, Venerable Robina. I have a question. It's whenever I share some ideas about emptiness with my friends or with people in general, I tend to use this example of the movie Matrix, where the little kid is trying to explain Neo that there's no spoon, but then that's Chittamatra, for what I have heard. I mean, it's because it says that there's.
Fernando, what's
Yes.
the question?
The question is, would it be better to use the IKEA example rather than?
Would you please just not talk about it to your friends? They're not ready. Jesus
Yeah,
Christ, Fernando. You break a body suffer vow if you do that. You might even break a tantric vow. So be careful who you speak it to. It's just being clever.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. Bloody hell, as we say in Australia. Next. Eileen, darling. Unmute, sweetheart. Fernando, talk about attachment, please, and anger. Start simple, honey. Stuff that they can understand, that be real for them, real for them, real for them. Go.
Thank you, Robina. So this sense of I that we construct through everything, our career choices, how we dress, everything, right? The
And
sense of,
that's a grosser level.
right,
Nevertheless.
right. But if we experienced emptiness, it's not that we wouldn't live in relative reality, but we wouldn't be as identified with it. It wouldn't be.
No, emptiness. This is a good point. Right now, we can't help but think that emptiness somehow denies reality. And that's nihilism. Emptiness reinforces reality, Eileen. You'd become more realistic. You become more in the ordinary world. You'd become more normal. You'd become more of all the good things. You actually more, not less. That's nihilism. Because emptiness reinforces cause and effect, reinforces ethics, reinforces life, reinforces virtue. Things exist because they are empty of existing intrinsically.
Thank you.
You'd wear your labels very lightly, in other words.
Yes, that's what I was trying to.
Finally, for the sake of sentient beings, you'd wear the labels. You know, it's not as if, oh no, there's no I. I mean, for example, it's very interesting, and some of the analysis we do, we'll discuss this, you know, when you're doing all this kind of, even looking at your mind, the way the Tibetans talk is, there is attachment, there is anger, there is jealousy. We say, I am angry, I am jealous. We take to one brush, we paint the whole of us with that brush. It's more precise. There is anger, there's jealousy, there's love, there's kindness. We're objective about it. And so one of the ways of learning to discuss too is about the I. The I, Robina, cannot be equivalent to the parts. The label can't be the base. So you get into the habit of thinking to yourself, I am the person labeled Robina. But as Geshe Tekchok, my philosophy teacher, said, you don't go around being all smarty pants and saying when you introduce yourself, oh, I'm the person called Robina. Just say I'm Robina and be done with it. But you don't believe I am Robina. It's just convenience. It's convenience. You wear it very lightly. You don't buy into the misconceptions, but you don't chuck the baby out for bathwater. That's the point. That's what we've got to get used to. We're going to discuss more of that in a minute, how emptiness doesn't contradict reality, it reinforces it. Once we understand that, we're on track with heading to the middle way, not to the two extremes. You understand?
Yes, thank you.
Further.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody? Who else is that? Yes, Elaine. Who is there here? Where? Okay, darling, talk to me. Wait a second. You next. Talk, sweetheart.
Thanks, Ms. Venerable Robina. So I just have a real quick question about like being reincarnated.
Who?
If we're reincarnated,
Okay.
okay,
Yeah.
the personalities that everybody individually has, is that like
The person what?
the individual personalities that we have?
Yeah. Well, that's just this is just present package.
So is that an ego or is that like our tendencies?
They're your tendencies. They're your tendencies. You've got goodness and badness and love and compassion and kindness and good at music and good at football. They're just your tendencies that you bring, that are some of the karmic imprints in you that fruited in this life. When that package goes, depending on the seed you've planted, and particularly depending on the seed that is triggered when you die, that'll produce the next shape, the next bunch of tendencies. If you're a naughty person, you'll run like a magnet to a lion mummy, and you'll end up looking like a lion and acting like a lion and having a body that suits a lion's mind. So it's a new package, a new expression of other tendencies in your mind. But the continuity is the consciousness.
And another question on that, is consciousness and Buddha nature the same?
What?
Is consciousness and Buddha nature
No,
the
no,
same?
no. Buddha nature just is referring to your capacity of your mind to become Buddha. That's all. That's all. It's just simply a way of talking that your mind has the potential to become a Buddha. That's all. Do you understand? Okay. All right. Yes. Okay. Where we are. Elaine, sweetheart.
Hi, I'm reading a book written by a Tibetan Buddhist monk.
Who is he?
But
What's
he
his
is
name?
Anam Tubten,
Who?
A-N-A-M, Anam Tubten,
I don't know who it is. Is he a Tibetan, American, French?
Nyingma tradition.
Oh,
is
Nyingma,
what
okay,
I
but
know about.
okay, good.
Nyingma, okay.
Is he a
And-
Tibetan or is he a American or what? A
Tibetan. But it's a different tradition than
That's-
our
I
than
understand
Galo.
that. Yes, of course.
All right. What he is saying in the book
Uh-huh.
is that we really have to drop all of this analysis and trying to think through
Yeah.
what emptiness is
Yeah.
to actually get to
Okay,
the
darling. What he's referring to,
luminous mind.
okay, darling. He's referring to an approach that is called either Mahamudra or Dzogchen. And that's a more sophisticated level of practice that is exactly that. Lama Yeshe's book, you should get that one too. Lama Yeshe's book called Mahamudra, my teacher's book, called Mahamudra, How to Discover Our True Nature. This is describing this seemingly more simple meditation, but actually a more sophisticated meditation that is not to do with analysis. It's exactly right. It's a much more experiential approach. It's one of the many approaches. They're all valid. It's just a different approach, sweetheart.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, yeah, and so, but let me explain to you. It's very interesting, Lama Yeshe talks about this in his book, Mahamudra. We can see in ordinary life, the typical way we learn things is the learning and the analysis and the internalizing, isn't it? You learn musical theory, you practice it, you think about it, you make it coherent, and then you practice and practice until you become like Bach. You agree?
Yes.
You learn cake recipes, you practice and practice until you've become like Julia Child. You agree?
Yes.
We all see that's the typical way we learn, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, the Dzogchen Mahamudra approach, which on the face of it sounds simple, as Lama says, no dogma, no philosophy, no this, no good, no bad. It sounds delicious, but let me give you an analogy of what it's actually like. So we've got the one approach of listening to Bach's music and then going and practicing slowly, slowly. The Mahamudra or Dzogchen approach is you go straight to the piano and you try to intuit Bach. Now, that's pretty complicated, isn't it? So already it implies, ironically, the person who's capable of it is the one who's done the thinking and the analyzing and the brain squeezing. But they're different approaches, and we all should try them. There's nothing wrong. But we should know what we're doing, Elaine.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you. That clears it up.
Okay, good one. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Who else?
There's a question.
Yes.
Is it detrimental to enjoy things in this life if we can recognize that they're not inherently enjoyable?
Well, I mean, I'm going to give you the technical answer again. It's really important to understand the Buddhist psychological model. We discussed there are 3 categories of states of mind. You got that? The neurotic, deluded, ridiculous ones, the main one of which is attachment, which is this greedy, grasping, frantic, little needy little girl that believes those happy feelings will come from the cake and the boyfriend and the handbag, right? That's the problem. Then you've got the virtuous states of mind, love, compassion, wisdom, more of those, baby. Then you've got the mechanics of the mind. And oddly, because we don't have a concept like this in our psychology or neuroscience, I don't think, No, we don't. But in the third category, you got intention, attention, concentration, good memory. They're like a murderer needs good concentration. A murderer needs good motive, good attention. They're not good or bad in their nature, but they cause us to function, whether you're bad or good. You got with me? Now, curiously, in that category, there is one called feeling. And they're not using it as an equivalent of emotion. It's a bare bones fundamental function of being a mind possessor connected to a body, that we have feelings, either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Forget the neutral. The pleasant one, a pleasant feeling, another word for that is happiness. Now, our trouble is when we think of happiness, because we're so convinced the cake causes it, we think it's the cake. So when we hear we're supposed to give up attachment to the cake, we chuck the baby out to the bathwater and then we have to give up pleasure as well. No, that's not being said, but we just don't know how to fit pleasure into it. You get my point here? So happy feelings, sweetheart, are what the goal is for you to get very, very, very ridiculously happy feelings. Are you hearing my point? So go for it. As Amiyeshi would say to us, all the self-piteous hippies, walk around looking miserable. You people don't even know how to be happy. And they keep saying, the more pleasure, the better, dear. Sounds naughty, doesn't it? But happiness is simply the natural function of a body and a mind combined. And yes, it is triggered by the cake, but it becomes contaminated because you keep eating more cake, wanting more pleasure, but it goes downhill instead of up. So it's not a moralistic issue. It's just a wrong method. So happiness is what you end up with, Buddha says, when you've given up delusions and you've only got virtue. You are a gloriously happy person. Are you with me?
Thank you.
Good. Okay, who else?
Venerable?
Yeah.
Hello. Hi, it's Jacqueline.
Hello,
How
Jack.
are you?
I'm very well.
I was reading your materials last night and you were, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I was reading your materials last night talking about how real practice must be painful and how practice must threaten something, which I found really important. And I was hoping that maybe you can just elaborate on that a little bit.
When you go to the gym, you know that if you stop on your treadmill, if you stop on your treadmill, the moment it hurts, you can't say you've really done your work at the gym. In order for the muscles of the body to start changing and your metabolism and everything, you've got to go beyond that hurt. So you don't go for 2 hours, you'll break your back, but you do it incrementally. So it has to hurt in order for you to go home to the gym and say, oh, I feel lovely, No, you didn't do the work, honey. We know this. But we get so tortured when it comes to emotional stuff, Of course, practice has to threaten your attachment, threaten your anger, threaten your jealousy. I mean, it's sometimes going to be terrifying, threatening the very sense of an I itself. It can be like a panic attack. Good sign, honey. Do you understand?
Yes, I do. I mean, I struggle a lot with anger and the triggers.
All right.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Join the universe.
I know. And it's a struggle. And the triggers, and I watch my mind all the time and I'm aware of a lot of things and I try to, balance and find a happy medium where I can be happy with my mind and happy with my life. But yet the triggers are so quick when certain things are said or, and the triggers, I know it's practice. I know that it's incremental in stopping the feeling of being, I can't think of the word, but protecting myself. And I need to protect myself by being angry with you, by lashing out.
That's right.
So
this is why. So there's various first practices, Jacqueline, well before you get to actually changing the mind. It's too complicated. The first one is you've got to protect yourself, yes, by making sure you don't go near the environments that trigger it. Now, if that's your husband that does it, then you're in trouble. This is usually what it is. We don't go around killing strangers. We tend to kill our husband or our children because it's too close for comfort. And that's why it's outrageous. This is why then, if you know you're going to be in an environment where people are triggering your anger, the very first practice is to make a vow in the morning to shut your mouth. I can't stress this enough, Jacqueline? It's not enough just to vow I won't be angry. That's too broad. You've got to vow not to say the words, darling. You know the power of that. And if you can go one day without spitting it out, you might be raging inside, but at least you don't harm the other person and you don't create the need. Because we know once it's out the mouth, it's too late. This is a really profound practice, and we don't even pay attention to it in our culture. So you control your speech. Make a vow in the morning. I'm going to watch my speech like a hawk. Forget watching your mind. This is tremendous practice. You've got to start where you are. Then you've got the power to watch the mind. If you can't escape from this environment, which is intense already, then you've got to control your speech. And when you do your four opponent, do you do the practice at the end of the day? Do you do the purification practice?
I try to.
At
Yeah.
night time, you vow, I'm going to watch my speech like a hawk tomorrow. You wake up in the morning and you remember that vow. And we know, Jacqueline, when you decide to do something is when you will do it. Don't just have guilt and shame and I did it again. You vow to yourself for your own sake, I'm going to not say those words today. And don't be surprised that you will keep your vow to yourself, but you got to say it. You understand?
Yes, it's the only thing that once that trigger happens and it's in the body, and
No,
if I walk away,
No, it's not, darling. Don't talk like that.
well,
What are
I
you
mean
talking- What do you mean the trigger? What are you
the
talking
fear. Well, once someone says something, then it triggers the anger in me, and then I feel it in my body, and I need.
That's right, but
to
if you don't
express
say
it.
the words.
If
But
I- yeah, if I-
but listen, start with
Yeah.
the words, Jacqueline.
Yes.
They say when you're with others, you watch your body and speech. When you're on your own, you watch your mind.
Mhm.
We don't think like that in our culture. So we make a mess of all our relationships. We don't think I must control my speech. We just think I should be controlled. It's too broad. It's a revelation when you can get this one. When you're with others, control your body and speech. When you're on your own, you have the luxury to work on your mind, Jacqueline. Try
But
it.
Yeah. No. I
But
will-
what?
the
But what?
question. I'm sorry.
But what? You said
The
but.
question is, if that feeling within me, that fear, the hatred, how do I eliminate that if I walk away?
Mother of
I mean,
Jesus,
breathing.
God in heaven, precious Jacqueline. I'm not being rude, please. I love Mother of Jesus. Jacqueline, forgive me. Your first job is to shut your mouth.
Well, yes.
But then don't say just yes like that. If you can do that, already you are calming the anger down. Already you are harnessing it. Then when you're on your own, you still feel the rage. You're wanting something more subtle before you're ready, Jacqueline. When you first can decide, I'm going to watch my mouth, then the anger stops at the door. Already that implies some control. Then you can work more with the anger when the servant of the anger is under control.
Okay.
It will come naturally as you keep progressing. You can't make that instant trigger go away. That's a sign that it's a very old habit. So first you control the servant of the anger. Then you can slowly work on the mind itself, the anger itself, by arguing with it, by analyzing it, by seeing the pain it causes you. That's the analysis we have to do. And then slowly, slowly, you will change it. Slowly, slowly, Jacqueline.
Okay.
Are we communicating, darling?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
It applies to all of us. Don't worry. It's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Break, I think. What happened to our break? Wait a minute. 12 o'clock. No tea break. I'm sorry. No, just anyway, go on. So are there any other questions? Yes, sweetheart.
I'm terrible at keeping vows to myself. I lie to myself and I'm dishonest and I'm committed and then I forget and I let myself off the hook.
I understand. We all do that.
I know, but how do and then I'm mad at myself, and like, it's just, I think I'm addicted to actually.
Well, everyone's like the
I'm
same.
attached to.
That's
like,
right. Everyone's the
bringing
same.
them up.
Everyone's the same. But at least it sounds to me you know what the problem is. You've identified it.
Yeah, yeah.
So then you don't, you do all the same things, except you don't get mad at yourself. You change that one. You have to change that one.
Mm,
Are you hearing me?
yes.
You have to change that thought. When you get mad, you say, no, it's okay. I'm a human. I'm lazy. I've got old habits, but I can do it. If you say get mad at yourself, you're set in stone and it's too late. That's guilt. And you beat yourself up and it just gets worse. So the rest, you recognize you lie to yourself. You get yourself on the hook. You see it all. That's okay. Recognize it. And then but you change that thought. It's very precise. You say to yourself, it's okay. It's all right, honey. I'm human and I'm going to make an effort and I'm going to pick myself up. I'm going to try next time.
Isn't that like
What?
wanting to? I feel like you should be more authoritarian to myself. So,
Well, clearly it hasn't worked so far.
I know.
If it worked, keep doing it. I mean, try another method.
True, it's not working. So,
Okay then.
yeah.
But no, but being mad at yourself isn't just being authoritarian. Being mad at yourself is guilty. I'm a bad person. And that's not valid. The
Yeah.
Christians have a nice saying, don't criticize the sinner, criticize the sin. Don't criticize yourself, which is what ego does. Say, well, that anger's no. The other part of me is okay. My intelligence is good. My kindness is good. My this is good. But look at the anger. It's ridiculous. Or look whatever it is. To be more precise in your analysis and you regret it. This is where the purification practice comes in every day if we do it. Regret is not guilt. Regret is, oh my God, look at my foolishness. Look at my old habits. That's an old habit. Like Elaine talking about the triggers, old habit. And that's just because I've been habitual. And you think, I'm sick of this suffering. Because regret is like kindness to yourself, not guilt. I'm sick of this suffering. So what can I do? You've got to check those words to replace I'm bad.
Thank you.
It's quite precise. We're thinking we have to do. And just be humble and patient with yourself. Authoritarian, if you want to beat yourself up and say, get on with it, that's okay if it works. But just being guilty is not just authoritarian, it's a misconception. It's like when you're saying, I am bad, I did this and I did that and I did this, and then you paint the whole of yourself. I'm bad. That's what anger is. You did this and you did that and you're bad. And that's a mistake. It's just not a valid conception. It's too exaggerating. So be more precise.
Thank you.
And see the suffering it causes you. We never do that. We think that's sort of self-centered. That's what renunciation is. You've got to realize that you're sick of the pain. You understand?
Yes, thank you.
I mean, I know it's only 12 o'clock, but it's like, come on, let's have a break. I mean, we'll make it our lunch break. It doesn't matter. I mean, because I shout and yell and talk fast. That's a bit exhausting, isn't it? I think it's lunchtime. Then we'll go into more emptiness after lunch. And if people come a bit late, it's okay. It's all right. So see you all in 90 minutes, you people, precious ones. Okie doke, which means at about 1:30, my time anyway, but you walk it at your own time. 10 past. So at 20 to 2, we come back. 12, 1:30. Yes. 20 to 2, our time. Okay, darlings. Goodbye. Thank you. Bye. Okay. So are there any questions from this morning for a start? And then we'll carry on. No discussion, no questions from this morning. Okay. So we're talking about the general topic is discussing the parts of our mind, the stories in our mind, the conceptual stories, the scripts, the viewpoints, the concepts, the opinions, the viewpoints, especially the emotional ones, the neurotic ones, and especially, yesterday, the branch ones, these attachment, this emotional hunger, never feeling enough, dissatisfaction, emotional hunger to always get something more because you don't feel like you're enough or have enough or are enough. Then over exaggerating the existence of the deliciousness of the thing, believing it will make you happy, expecting it, pursuing it, manipulating, controlling, possessing. And this is a habit, deep, insane habit, runs the universe. Alongside, of course, we've got our virtues, our saving grace. We're focusing on the neurotic ones here. And then the aversion and the panic attack of anger and annoyance and frustration and despair and depression, all of the spectrum of aversion that arises when attachment doesn't get what it wants, speaking simply. We'll look briefly at the more subtle level, which we didn't go into in too much. We did a bit yesterday, the attachment, the neediness to be seen even, which is really a symptom of the deepest kind of implication, the deepest symptom of this ego grasping. And today we're looking at the root one, this misconception deep in the bones of our being that assumes that it exaggerates the very status itself of things. It underpins attachment and anger and all the others, the hardest to see, therefore. So we're looking at how things exist in this final way called, and then we're looking at it in the framework of conventional and ultimate reality. It's a really good pair. This kind of gives kind of, it kind of keeps us grounded. So the shorthand, like I said, for this ultimate way that things exist is simply the word emptiness. And the shorthand for how things do exist conventionally is dependent arising. So right now we exist in the two extreme views, such that when we hear about there's no I, there's no this, there's no that from its own side, we hear there's nothing and fall into despair, fall into the abyss of the great mistake, nihilism. It's a very natural mistake to make. And then we think there are things, we reify, exaggerate, concretize, over-exaggerate them, and go between these extremes. So putting these two truths together is a really skillful way to understand. First intellectually, and then experientially. So now let's look at this word emptiness, because we really get confused about that. But it's good to look at it in ordinary daily life. We use the term all the time. You know, I pick up my cup and where's my cup? Here it is. I pick up my cup and I'll go, oh, it's empty. In fact, it's not, but if we did. So it's empty. So we know perfectly well it means it's empty of, in this case, hot water. If you're expecting you go to some hotel for a conference and they say it's in room 7, you go to room 7, you open the door expecting it full of people and you go, oh, it's empty. You look at your bank account expecting money, oh, it's empty. We say that, but it always, so let's look at the use of the word. You only, if you go to the shops, I forget what we call it in America, in Australia, you call it crockery. This is crockery. The cups and saucers and plates is called crockery. What do we call it here? Flatware. Some weird term. What does it mean, flatware? I mean, oh, that's the knives and forks. What's the plates and cups? What do you? No, you go to buy a whole set of China. You say China.
Utensils.
Who?
Utensils.
No, that's the cups and saucers. No, that's the knives and forks. And you get my point.
Knives and forks.
You walk into the shop for your set of plates and saucers and cups. You don't look at the cups and go, oh, mummy, all the cups are empty. Think about this. You wouldn't say that because you're not expecting tea in your cup, are you? In a crockery shop. So this is a really interesting point about it. This expecting. The only person who's going to, if you think you've got $5,000 in your bank, you're about to come on my trek with me in October. You need your airfare and your trek money, and you've got your $5,000 saved, and it's there, because you saved it in the bank account. And you look in your bank account, and actually what appears to you is a zero. We're going to get to the point here. But you'll get a big shock. Oh my God, where's my precious $5,000? My bank account is empty, you'll say. So now, listen to this point. This is the point we're getting to. Buddha's saying, when you look inside, you're looking inside the aggregates here, looking inside the body and mind. You're doing this search for this little kind of Ziploc bag called I, with an eye on it. And you put all the other bits of Yogesh together. And then you open up the box expecting the final one, which is called I, isn't it? But there's nothing in the box. Oh my God, it's empty. Meaning something's not there. It means that something's not there. But the thing that's not there is only the thing you expect. If you're not expecting any money in your bank, and you ask me to look in your bank account, and I just say, oh, there's nothing there, there's a zero, I'm not surprised, because I don't expect $5,000. If I'm just looking in room 7 out of interest, I don't say, oh, it's all empty. Because I'm not expecting people there. It's a really important point. If you look in the cup, just on the shop, you're not surprised there's nothing in there. You don't expect anything, so you don't notice, you don't say anything. So the only person, even in ordinary life, who says, oh, it's empty, the room is empty, the bank account's empty, is the person who's expecting something. So what is it you're seeing? You've got to spell it out now. It's not just nothing is in the room. There's nothing in the room. I will see nothing in the room if I'm not expecting people, but I won't notice it. But if you're expecting something, you'll be a shock when you see that something isn't there. So the point here is when you're looking, you're doing the analysis within the aggregates, within the body and mind, the pieces that do exist, relatively speaking, within this search, and you're looking for the piece called I, you're looking for the piece called I, and you finally put all the bits together, and then you put your hand in waiting to pick up the final bit called I, and the Ziploc bag labeled I. Oh my God, the box is empty. Because you're expecting. So when you're realizing emptiness and you're in your meditation and you're doing the analysis, doing the research and blah, 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 and you've finally got shamatha and you've done all your numbers and you've done all your work on it lifetime after lifetime, week after week, whatever it is, done your analysis, your logical analysis. And then at some point, you will nakedly notice the absence of that thing you're expecting to be there. You notice the absence of the thing that you thought has been there since beginningless time, but finally you notice it isn't there. That's what emptiness of an inherent I means. So in other words, as Holiness says, one time he said, you don't just do the other way, do the research the opposite way around. You've got the Yogesh already made up. So you've got to pull it apart. You literally got to pull apart all the pieces again. You want to send it back to IKEA because you're dissatisfied with this boring old Yogesh. So you've got to pull all the bloody parts apart and put them back in the box. And you keep pulling them apart. There's the leg, there's the this, there's the eyebrow, there's the nose, and you're expecting the final bit to come out as the eye. Oh, there's no eye. It's not Yogesh isn't empty because you can't find the bit called I. He's empty because it's a dependent arising. There are little bits there, and that you discover that they're the basis of the label I. The I is a label. So if you go into the bank account looking for $5,000, there is nothing there. That's like nihilism. There is nothing there. But that's not what you're cognizing. This is the thing. When Yogesh looks at his bank account for his $5,000, he's already been on the pilgrimage. He doesn't have to come again. Oh, that's the pilgrimage. That's not the trek. You haven't been on the trek, have you? You haven't been to Laudo with me, have you? No, he's only been to India for the pilgrimage. Just pretend he had the ready to go to the trek. And he's looking, he's expecting 100% his $5,000. What he will see, in fact, what will appear to him, what will appear to his eyes is a zero. But what appears to his mind, shockingly, is the absence of $5,000. So this is why emptiness is not nihilism. If you like, zero is nihilism. There's nothing there. And I will see the truth. There's nothing there. But that's not what appears to Yogesh. So the object my mind cognizes as absent is a zero. The object that appears to his mind, because he's looking for $5,000, he's expecting $5,000, the object is called the absence of $5,000. And that's not the same as no dollars. So looking for the inherent I and discovering the absence of what you thought was there is not the same as chucking all the bits out and finding nothing. This is the point to be able to understand. It's not, there's no I. It's not, there's nothing there. And that's the typical way we'll conclude, but that's not correct. That's nihilism. That's meaningless. That's rubbish. You chuck the baby out the bathwater. The more we understand that when the mind cognizes, it always cognizes something. The mind is a subject and always has an object. Whatever level of mind, gross or subtle, sensory or mental, deluded or virtuous, it always has a thing that it cognizes. So when I look at the bank account, I cognize as zero. That's in a sense, that's nothingness. He will cognize the absence of his $5,000. They're two very different objects to appear to our minds. So when you're meditating, you finally realize there never has been, isn't, and could not be that inherent I. That's the absence of the I you always thought was there. It's not just mere nothingness. It's not nothingness. It's the absence of what you thought was there. And so it's a very rich thing that you discover. You're looking for the I, but you discover the absence of the I. So the absence of the I is the name of the object, not no I. Not nothingness, not nothingness. It's not just intellectual. It's a really delicious point when you get it. Then you're not being nihilistic. because it sounds like it. And then the final conclusion is Yogesh is the name that you put upon the base, and the base is the bits and pieces. Then it's interesting. Then we also then cling to the bits and pieces as being inherent. Oh, well, I must have an ear. No, because ear too is a label you put upon its basis, the parts. Oh, there's an earlobe then, is there? No, earlobe is a label you put upon its parts. And you keep going like that down to the subtlest atoms, and you'll never find an intrinsic something. So again, emptiness actually reinforces dependent arising. But as Lama Zopa says, when you realize emptiness, it's as if there's no I. But there is an I, but what does exist is so subtle, it's as if there's no I. It's as if it doesn't exist. So it's like a really fine point, these two truths. And we need to have them together, because they're the flip side of the same coin in a sense. So not only does existence not be denied by emptiness, it's reinforced by emptiness. In fact, something can't exist if it weren't empty. Something that isn't empty of intrinsic existence can't exist. All this is abstract to us because we haven't thought about it. And we don't think we think these things. Buddha is simply pointing out what our deluded mind is thinking already, but it's so subtle, we don't realize we're thinking it because it's too primordial. So you have to begin to recognize the mistakes we make before you discover what is true. And what's true will counteract the mistakes. It's like that. The Heart Sutra is a very nice example. Buddha is telling us in the Heart Sutra exactly this about the two truths. So in the Heart Sutra, Buddha is going through all the different categories of phenomena according to the Buddhist view of the world. And he's letting it, and we're seeing, because the Heart Sutra is Buddha in meditation. So it's from the perspective of a person in meditation on the absence of inherent existence. So it's quite subtle. But what he's saying is he just takes the different groupings of phenomena, like the 5 aggregates, for example. A person is made up of form, feeling, these 5 different components. One of the sutras of the teachers of Buddha points out a person is made up of these 5 components. So he would say in the Heart Sutra, there's no form, no feeling, no this, no that, no this. There's no this, no this, no this, no that, no that. There's no, going through all the different categories. The 5 aggregates, the 12 noble truths, the four noble truths, the 4 noble truths, the 12 links, blah, 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 all these different phenomena. And then at some point in the very beginning part, Shariputra, because what the Heart Sutra is Buddha sitting there in meditation, he's channeling his thoughts into the mind and mouths of his 2 disciples, Shariputra and Avalokitesvara, as a 10th level bodhisattva, as a human being. They're having a discussion. He's in meditation, but it's his words coming out their mouths. Apparently, Sai gave you quite a few of his teachings. So Shariputra says, starts with the first of the 5 aggregates. He says, form is empty. And then he says, emptiness is form. And then he says, emptiness is nothing other than form. And form is nothing other than emptiness. So he's telling us about the 2 truths here, how they coexist. They're dependent. You can't have one without the other. In other words, spell it out. So let's just, form could be anything. It could be Yogesh, or say Yogesh, or I, your own name, think it. Or computer, or mug, or whatever exists. So you spell it out. So it's saying, wherever there is a dependent arising, in this case it says form, but we could say I. Wherever there's a dependent arising I, which is the label for your name, say Yogesh. Wherever there's a dependent arising Yogesh, you will find right there, you will find right there the emptiness of inherent Yogesh, right there. Where there is the dependent arising Yogesh, right there exists the emptiness of inherent Yogesh. And then wherever you find the emptiness of inherent Yogesh, you will find right there dependent arising Yogesh. So in other words, simply speaking, emptiness of inherent existence is a characteristic of things that exist. That's the final analysis. You can't, you go through the analysis, you go through looking for the I that you think is there, and you discover the absence of that I. And then you look for the I that you think is oneness with all the parts. You do these two analyses and you discover it can't be the same. So the conclusion isn't, oh, well, there's no I, and chuck the baby out the bathwater, and how depressing, I might as well die, because there's no I. You finally realize there's no I because it's dependent arising. So emptiness of I, emptiness of inherent I, is a characteristic of a dependent arising I. Emptiness of an inherent computer is the characteristic of a dependent arising computer. Emptiness of an inherent existent mug is a characteristic of a dependent arising mug. So you can't have one without the other. So one reinforces the other. It's just two different ways of talking about the same thing, speaking loosely. We get used to that, then we're moving in the right direction with the two truths. If we haven't got that, we swing between the two extremes and we go potty, That's what they say in England and Australia, you go potty. That's English. You go nuts. Well, we're already nuts. So you stop being nuts when you start putting the two truths together. Put it that way. So they're just thoughts. These are thoughts, okay? Once we get them clear, we get a bit of a sense of the intellectual truth of them. This is a good start. Then we can start to get the taste of them. And then you keep applying every day and remembering it. Then it starts to become real for us. So basically, again, summarizing, what Buddha's telling us is we suffer because within our mind, we have layers and layers and layers of misconceptions, which really is a very surprising concept. Who would have thought that you're suffering because you see things wrongly? It's like a joke, The world appears to us to be cause of suffering is out there, very clear. And the happiness is out there too. This is a really dualistic, gross way that samsara manifests in front of us. We really believe that. That's samsaric. That's really that's the philosophy the universe has. Monkeys and dogs too. No one teaches us. We've just brought this with us, this misconception. So we've got to start arguing with it. Argue with it from the point of view of karma, especially starting. And then arguing in terms of the grosser delusions, the branch delusions, attachment and all the others, how they're projections on top of what is there, exaggeration, distorted views of what is there. And then we get to the subtlest one, the subtlest mistake. And when that's cut, we've cut the root of samsara. You've got more work to do, but you can't go back after that. You can't fall back after that. So these are descriptions of someone's experience. They're not just things you make up and then impose. Buddha's not a creator. No such thing. You don't need creating, he says. There's no creator. Doesn't use that word God. Not like in that way. No superior being Buddha uses the word superior being, but by the time you realize emptiness, you become a superior being. It's Arya being, it's a certain term, but it doesn't mean a creator. There's no view like that. That's the radical difference in Buddhist philosophy between all the other spiritual philosophies, There's no boss. Don't need a boss. There's a big shock to us. Don't need a boss in here. Don't need an I to run the show, which we assume is the truth. It's a big shock. And the universe doesn't need bosses to run it, to make it, then run it, and punish and reward. No, like that. Not like that. So it's an interesting idea. So don't just believe it. Don't just swallow it whole. I believe in karma. Don't say that. You've got to prove it to be true. Buddha might be wrong. You've got to prove it to be true. And this is what's interesting. Don't underestimate intellectual certainty. That's got to come not just because you believe it and you grasp at it like a vampire. You've got to be logical. Got to use logic to prove it to be true. I can't see you people. I want to see the people. Thank you. Like how kind you are. Thank you. Yeah, that's it. Lovely. So, this is my glasses, isn't it? Oh gosh. So, any questions, people? Any questions about what we've discussed again so far? Any questions? Online, nothing. So, how to put this into practice is the obvious question, isn't it? Or someone asked His Holiness. And it's so simple. His answer was so simple. It's funny, He said, try and see things from another point of view. That's dependent arising. This is proving that things are the way. This is the essential point that Buddha is making, that everything exists in terms of how we see it. It's not a joke, you know. It's so true. So if I'm angry with Yogesh, no, if I'm attached to Yogesh and he's a saint, you know, I've painted him with the whole brush because he does what I want, so he's just divine. And you start to question that. Calm down, Robina. Which doesn't mean you start to find him ugly and see mistakes. But attachment, see, there's nothing wrong with seeing his good qualities. That's good. But when you exaggerate them and exaggerate their very status, and then they blind you to everything else, everyone else on the planet can see he's cheating on me, but I can't. I'm as blind as a bat because I'm attached. We all know this. So see things from a different perspective. Sort of bring yourself down to earth, be more realistic. There's all the things that Buddha would say. Then I'm angry with him. If he comes home 5 minutes late, he's having a panic attack. He doesn't love me anymore, whatever. We go extreme, we know that. And you see it from another point of view. It's really, because I mean, one of the functions of this ignorance, when it's very deep, when it's very grasped, when it's very holding on to us, it's everything is absolute. Everything is completely fixed. We can see that. What you're seeing, what we see is what we think is true, and that's it. Set in stone, all these terms we have. We know it's not true. We know even this is conventional reality. When you've got a fixed opinion. It doesn't mean, you see, then you don't chuck the baby out of the bathwater and think there's no truth at all. 1 + 1 is 2. We've proven it to be true conventionally. So being fanatic about that and having a panic attack every time you hear someone say the wrong thing, that's because of attachment. That doesn't deny the truth of 1 + 1. There's a relative reality on that plate. It is called a chocolate cake. But attachment over-exaggerates its characteristics. That's the mistake. So you don't chuck the baby out the bathwater and think there's no chocolate cake, or you think that the cake's ugly instead of nice. That's extreme. You remove the lies, you remove the layers. And this is the part that's hard. It's quite nuanced to do this. There is a cake. But remember, as Lama Zopa says, when we realize the emptiness of the cake, it's as if there's no cake, but there is. And of course, it's called merely labeled cake. This is hard to get. Merely labeled. Everything is merely labeled. So there is reality, conventional, but it's very light. We see everything, we're very heavy right now. Our labels are very heavy. This is bad, this is good, this is evil, this is nice, this is up, this is down. We're fanatic about it. Set in stone, fanatic, you know. It doesn't deny, so emptiness doesn't deny reality. It reinforces it as dependent arising reality. There's still 1 + 1 is still 2. That doesn't disappear into a puff of smoke. That's silly. You are still Yogesh, but not the Yogesh with a capital I and capital Y-O-G-E-S with several exclamation marks. You understand? That's how we think of I now. Big drama queen I, you know? Not like that. So it's a fine point to get. And all we can do is think it through carefully, read it. That's why it's so auspicious to hear the teachings just quietly with our mind very open, not thinking we know this already, especially to hear the holy beings talk. If you hear your lamas talk, if you hear his holiness, you read his words. Anyone can say the words that Dalai Lama says. It's easy words. But when it's coming, this is an important point, when it's coming from the mind of a person who knows it, that's very different. Then it can ring true for us. So just reading it, contemplating it, tasting it, listening to it. But choose your teachers carefully, choose the books you read, because there's a lot of rubbish published. This is with respect, because we think religious philosophy is open to anybody to interpret as they wish. We're so eager to be clever in the modern culture, we'll just write endless things about emptiness. You read, you go to some course for a couple of months and you think you know all about it, so you write a book about it. That's common in the West. So what's the benefit of this? Well, the benefit is finally when you cut off, the benefit of seeing the lies in the mind is you lessen them and then you lessen your suffering. It's very clear. That's the logical conclusion. We're not discussing benefiting others yet. This is all the wisdom wing. You're the beneficiary of this. So first of all, even just controlling your speech, you start to get a bit more content because you're beginning to get some kind of control. Then you start to control your mind. And you start to reconfigure the stories in there and believe less in the delusions. You start to become more equal, more even, have more equanimity within yourself. more content, more fulfilled, more happy. You've got to keep remembering that's the natural consequence. And then as you then go to the compassion wing, you have more empathy for others, more connectedness, more courage. The world doesn't freak you out. You get more courage to never give up helping others. Then you realize, start to look into emptiness. There's this gradual, natural psychological progression, you know. You become happier and happier and wiser and more confident and more marvelous and more compassionate. This is the process. So never forget that we're the beneficiaries of this practice, and then enabling us to be a benefit to others. That's why it's so important, like we discussed yesterday, when I dismissed Gina's point, you know. It's first necessary to really taste our own suffering. The commonest one we say is because we're so used to thinking that suffering is only the gross suffering, you know, being poor or being abused. Oh, I'm not suffering, I'm lucky. No, we're not understanding Buddha's view of suffering. That's the suffering of change, suffering of attachment. We have to, you know, like my therapist friend who's a Buddhist, you know, put our hands in our own shit. Or I like to say, eat our own vomit. You understand? And this is not meant to be self-pity or drama. It's observing the way our own misconceptions cause us pain. We have to be in touch with that suffering. This is what renunciation means, giving it up. So not just to be all noble, oh yeah, and I'm run around having compassion for others. Having compassion for the person who harms you will come later. You have to own the part about karma first and see how you've created the cause yourself, and see the suffering of your own anger, your own resentment, your own pointing fingers, how that causes you incredible pain. Then you can begin to have the space to have compassion for others. It's got to come last. It's got to come more. If you can go there right now, that implies you know about your own suffering. Otherwise, it's not possible. So the whole process of working on yourself and then helping others is all rooted in changing the mind. So the first stages of practice, you're mainly focusing on the delusions. Then as you loosen them, the virtues can come to the surface. As you pull out the weeds, the flowers have got space to grow. That's natural. But you're not focusing on growing the virtues yet, if you like. Then when you get to the compassion wing, you proactively now continue to work on your mind. That never changes. But now you're focusing more on lessening the delusions that prevent you from seeing others. The first one is removing the delusions that prevent you from being happy. Here now you continue to work on the mind and remove the delusions that prevent you from, you're breaking down the barriers between you and others, you know. That comes later. So like we talked on a little bit on yesterday, I think yesterday we talked, one of the jobs is enormously difficult, certainly when it comes to attachment and anger and all the delusions, it's awfully difficult to distinguish them between the virtues, because we don't have this analysis too much in our culture. So then attachment and love, for example, they're like completely mixed like water and milk. It's almost impossible in the beginning, it's almost impossible without masses of hard inner work to see the difference. We conflate them, literally. But attachment, if we're able to isolate it, first intellectually and then experientially, it's a completely obsessive, neurotic, I-based, fear-based, totally self-centered. It's like it feels heavy to hear this. Totally fear-based, panic-stricken, I-based, greedy, bottomless pit of a frantic person, little I in there, this attachment. It's fierce. If we had mainly attachment in my relationship with Yogesh, I'd eat him for breakfast and spit out the bones. That's what people call narcissistic, and that's what people call psychopaths. Totally self-centered, because attachment is so fierce and very little even connectedness with any others, because the sense of I is so fierce and getting what I want. That's what narcissistic means. This is what psychopath means. That's all. The delusions predominate. Animals are psychopaths. I mean, you get very upset about this because we think animals are little angels, you know. I mean, this is not trying to be critical. It's just trying to see the suffering of animals. It's one of the heavy-duty rebirths. Lama Zopa said one time, this is very shocking for us. If we understand ignorance, the Rigpa, the root delusion, and the attachment and aversion, just the three, then animals have these 1 billion times more powerfully than we do. Why? Is because they can't access their virtue. Their minds are absolutely fixated in fundamentalism, in fixedness, in ego grasping, and therefore bottomless pit of attachment, bottomless pit of aversion, and the other delusions. Lama Zopa said one time, if you could just for a moment have a direct experience of the mind of your little cute dog, the mental suffering would be so unbearable, you'd never want to waste another precious second of this human life. That's really hard for us to hear. We would never think that our dog is suffering, not for 1 second, mentally. We can't even see human beings suffering because we can't see the mind, we just see the external, isn't it? Ignorance, Rigpa, is the root delusion, and every sentient being by definition has that. As humans, we've at least got access to our virtues, and that's our saving grace, and that makes us a little bit less neurotic, although we're pretty incredible. But animals are a million times more suffering, a million times more ignorance, a million times more attachment, a million times more aversion, a million times more aggression. I mean, we don't like to think this way, but this is the evidence. If you just look at a lion, mummy lion, look at her stalking the buffalo for breakfast. She doesn't have an option, okay? You can tell her 1 million times. The buffalo doesn't like being ripped, have its flesh ripped apart alive. It is impossible ever for a being with a lion's mind, which means a mind from being a human in the past life, but what ripened at the time of death was a tendency to kill. So that drives you to a lion mother's womb, and that triggers all the karmic seeds to have the personality of a lion. No access to virtue. Just total deluded habits. Eons of practice. She's an expert at ripping the guts out of buffaloes for breakfast. The buffalo screaming in agony. The lion doesn't notice because the attachment is so intense to get that breakfast. This is what's interesting with the Buddha. The Buddha puts all our sentient beings in the same boat. We're just different levels of happiness and suffering. We are just simply different levels of delusions and virtues. That's all. The spectrum of samsara. So if you were to see a human, the only option you had to get breakfast for your babies was to walk outside and stalk the next door neighbor and grab them by the throat and rip their guts out and call the babies while the next door neighbor screaming in agony as she dies slowly while you calmly eat the entrails, I suggest that person's a psychopath. Well, lions are psychopaths. All animals are psychopaths. I mean, I know, please try and hear the point. I always sound so dramatic. Buddhist psychology refers to all living beings, not just humans. That's the big surprise. These 3 poisons are shared by all beings. It's a question of degree, that's all. And the ignorance that can't see past our own nose, that sees things as absolute and concrete, set in stone, that gives rise to immense attachment, which gives rise to immense aversion and aggression. And this is what I find interesting. We can you'll bring your baby, you'll bring your children in to watch the television, to watch the nature shows. What you'll have up close on the camera will come up close on that lion, ripping the guts out of buffaloes, and you say that's nature. But I think if you brought your children in to watch you brought in the cat and you got the mouse, and you watched the cat rip the guts out of the mouse, I think you'd be put in prison, because cats and mice are a bit close to home, aren't they? Or you got your cat and your dog, and you got the dog to rip out the heart of your cat. I mean, you don't mind if your cat rips out the heart of the rat because you don't like rats. No one put you in prison. They'd think you're a hero for that. I was just talking, showing how we're so partial, we're very attached to some animals. We have disgust and aversion for the others, and we slaughter them very happily. So it's a bit irrational, really. It's a little bit based on attachment, It's got no logic to it. Rats feel just like pussycats. Mosquitoes and cockroaches just feel like pussycats. They don't want suffering either. So all Buddha's definition of being a samsaric being is being driven by the delusions. You're out of samsara when you've cut the root. You've got more work to do, but you can't go back after that. So empathy comes, compassion comes when there's less delusions, that's all. As you lessen delusions, so you grow empathy. It's just logical. It's a natural thing. As you pull out the weeds, there's space for the flowers to grow, isn't there? That's why you've got to work on the delusions first. That's why you got to work on the servants of the delusions first, calm the body and mind down, calm the body and speech down. I mean, look at the world. It's bad behavior, that's all. If we can control our body and speech, no one would kill anybody. It'd be a miracle. But that was utterly uncontrolled behavior, isn't it? We don't even think of it as a practice. This sounds curious to say control your speech, you know. This is why Elaine asked twice. But, you know, you can't control the mind until you begin to control the speech. You can try, but the servant has to be calmed first. Then you can get in touch with the mind. So Buddha's talking about how the delusions in our mind are the source of our suffering and how they they cause us pain, one, they cause us to harm others, two, and the why they do that is because they misrepresent reality to us. Attachment makes the friend look divine and the enemy look ugly, which brings anger and wanting to harm. And and when you bring in karma, like I think of, you know, these Russian boys on the war field, whatever it is, you know, running around killing lay people. What do you call them? What are they, not lay people, they call? Civilians. Civilians. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. It's because it's just the instinct is there, the wish to harm. They were sitting home with their wife before they went to the army, and suddenly they're slaughtering people. You know, they're probably surprised as anybody. That didn't come out of nowhere. Karmic imprints. And this is the part that's tough. This is really interesting. I'll use the good example again. Let's say I'm in love with Yogesh, and Yogesh is so kind to me. You think, oh, wow, I'm so special. Yogesh must be kind to me. I must be special. No, it's from the part, even if I'm mean, nasty, and cheat on him. The way someone appears to us is the extent of the particular karma that's ripening. So if Yogesh sees me as lovely, that's the extent of my virtue from the past that I appear so nice to him. So those Russian boys on the field see these Ukrainians, whatever reason, they don't read the newspapers, they haven't got their iPads with them. They're compelled to torture them. They don't know why. That's as much the karma. That's the karma of those people from 47 lives ago, the Ukrainians. They just see them and they loathe them and want to harm them. That's the karma of a rat. The rat has the karma to be, you know, this is called experience similar to the cause. Experience similar to the cause is the way you're seen and treated by others. And you are a major player in how people see and treat you. This is what's fascinating. Not from now, but from past lives. Karma's there. We come together, Yogesh and I, and even though I'm mean to him, he still sees me as lovely, you know. That's the extent of my virtue from the past. Those Russian soldiers see those Ukrainian mummy and daddy, and they want to murder them. They don't know why. They want to torture them. They don't know why. And the mummy and daddy don't know why either. They don't remember doing anything naughty 47 lives ago. So karma takes care, you know. We are compelled to meet each other again and again. And that's where, again, if we think of karma as a natural law, which is what Buddha is suggesting, because he didn't make it up. There's no creator. So where does it come from? Either some naughty person snuck around and made up a big story, which is what materialists think of religion. Or Buddha is actually telling us what he saw, as observed to be true, from the subtlety of his own mind and samadhi. That karma is a natural law. If it's a natural law, then whatever arises any millisecond in the mind and life of any living being necessarily is the fruit of your past actions. It has to be this. This is the logic of the law. So if you take that as this hypothesis, it's quite interesting. Every millisecond Yogesh is kind to me is due to my past virtue. I'm not discussing his mind as well, of course. He's compelled to want to be kind to me. Some people look at you, they loathe the sight of you. They don't know why they want to talk to you. They've got no idea. Well, they're compelled to talk to you, but it's not random that they're torturing you. And this is the interesting part, I think, in our culture. You know, what our first suffering, my first response when something bad happens is, why is this happening to me? It's very powerful, isn't it? I don't deserve it. Well, in this life, it's true. You did nothing to deserve it. It's true. You did nothing to deserve it. It's absolutely true. That's why we have to at least factor in karma. We've got to factor in past lives, just as a hypothesis, you know. So then what we do is we try to explain psychologically, oh, well, the reason Yogesh is mean to me because his mother hurt him when he was a little boy, and then the Catholic priests were mean to him and they abused him. That's why he harms. But that doesn't answer the question, why does he harm me? This is a really important point. Why me, in other words? It explains why he does bad things, but why me? We don't know how to explain that in our culture. Buddha explains that due to karma, we come together. We are drawn together. No one forces us. We are drawn together due to past karma. And then the extent of our own collective and individual actions towards each other, we then live that out. He sees me as nice all the time. It's due to my past virtue. That's why some people love Mr. Trump. No matter what he did or said, they didn't care. That's due to incredibly strong virtuous karma from his part, whatever number of lives ago was in relation to those particular people. Why people adored Mr. Hitler. It's not just random. From the Buddhist perspective, because this is dependent arising. Dependent arising means all the pieces are involved and they all play a part. We're all in this scenario together, you know. So that child who comes to that mother, it's not just random. At the time of our death, at the time the death process started, one of our billions of karmic seeds of past non-killing was triggered. At that time, we started stopping breathing. That was triggered, that programmed us to go specifically, in my case, to my mummy's womb while she was in bed with her daddy. That's a few weeks later. They're not thinking of me yet. But when I died, the karmic seed that drew me to my mother's fallopian tube already was triggered, already programmed. I caused it. Then when they hopped into bed, wherever they hopped, my mind read like a magnet. So we're all in this scenario together, you know. That's why I always talk about my abortion. Same thing. When I was 23, living in London, and I mean, it was actually, I felt I was lucky because it was 1968 and the National Health had just approved abortions. I felt, aren't I lucky, you know? So I went to the Charing Cross Hospital, saw some doctor. I always remember this weird doctor in a room with black walls. It was so peculiar. A psychiatrist. So I gave him some reason why I was valid to get an abortion. He ticked the box, and so I got an abortion. And it all happened very easily. Even that is very fascinating. Everything went so smoothly. What that's about is the fetus, that person who came to my womb, who created the cause at the time of their past death, not more than a few weeks before. They left a virtuous karmic seed of non-killing was triggered in that person's mind. And then when they died, and then I happened to remember this Australian boy, I remember, I don't want too much details, I always remember it, I'm sorry. You know, it's always famous, Australians are famous in London for living in a place called Earl's Court. It doesn't happen anymore, I'm sure. Back in the 60s and 70s, oh yeah, Australians live in Earl's Court. Well, this Australian bloke I met, I remember he was an architect and he earned £1 an hour. I was really impressed because I earned £13 a week. I was really impressed by his £1 an hour. I remember him. I didn't like him much, but I was a hippie, so hippies are nice. They sleep with people, you know. I mean, are you understanding me? I'm not trying to give you too much information, but this is how it was. So I remember vividly, this is also a very fascinating point, by the way. Again, it's too much information for you. If you're embarrassed, I'm sorry. Many women say this story. That second I was with this boy, I vividly remember, I knew that second, oh my God, I said to myself, I'm pregnant. One of my friends, her daughter and the daughter's husband were living with the family, with the parents, while they were getting their house built. And the daughter came down for breakfast one morning and said, oh, Mum, I'm pregnant. And the mother said, oh, when did you discover? 40 minutes ago. You understand? You're supposed to laugh there. People laugh normally. Do you understand what I'm saying? She knew she got, and that's the Buddhist point where consciousness comes. Consciousness comes to the egg and sperm when they join in the fallopian tube. That's the condition that's necessary. So in my abortion case, this person, I don't know if it was male or female, they came to my womb. Now, I've never had an abortion before or since, never got pregnant before or since, and never had the thought to kill anybody before or since. I've killed a few ants, I suppose, when I was younger. So I remember this is how karma is, collective karma. Together, we're in it together, in it together. So this being created the cause to come to my womb. So they were all sitting in this intermediate state, waiting, twiddling its thumbs, waiting for me to hop in bed with this boy. And then boom, they ran like a magnet. And that second, I knew they were there. That second, crystal clear. I didn't think about consciousnesses then. I didn't think about things like that. I was not a Catholic anymore. I was a hippie. But I remember vividly, oh no, I'm pregnant. And that second, I thought, I'm going to have an abortion. So in other words, that's due to the strength of the karma of the being who came to my womb from having killed me, for me to kill them. It's a dependent arising. We don't like to think this because we want to think we're all innocent victims. That's why many women have so much guilt about having an abortion, you know. I'm not trying to get us off the hook. We did decide to kill the baby. It's a baby from the second. That's why the consciousness is there. That's why it's a living being. But the strength of my thought, I will have an abortion, was the strength of the karma of the being to be killed. I mean, and then it happened easily. So that means the karma to be killed was so strong. The doctors had approved, the NHS approved, the nurses were kind, they did the thing. And then the poor fetus, they scraped it out wrong. So the poor little thing was all mangled. So I had to go back again for another D&C. That's the karma of that child. We don't like to hear things because we'd rather have evil Robina having an abortion. You know, we'd rather think it was all naughty. You know, you understand? No dependent arising. So then when you realize this, you don't make that baby. You created the cause. I created the cause for that child to come to my womb, you know. And then I created the cause, and it did too, for me to kill it. It depends. So when you take responsibility, you don't take responsibility for the whole thing, but for your bit. I was talking about with my mum, because she was, you know, incredibly attached to her 7 children, obviously, but she adored us all as well. And we had a bit of a dysfunctional family, like most people. So like all mothers, she over-exaggerated her role in the suffering of the family. You understand? It's all her fault. You understand? That's guilt. All my fault. It's not all your fault. It's not rational. We were in that scenario together, the 9 of us. We all did our bit to create the scenario called the Courtin family, you know. So my mother, I remember one point, I didn't quite get it then, screaming at her when she had all this guilt. You know, Mum, I played some role in my life. Would you mind backing off? Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm responsible for something in my life. In other words, she took all the responsibility onto herself. Like I'm this little kind of nothing. This is very rude. It's very rude being guilty, you know? It's very rude. Do you understand? It's very disrespectful to the person. Oh, it's all my fault. I did you. No, you didn't. I did some of me. Everything's a dependent arising. So that the extent to which Yogesh thinks I'm divine is the extent of my virtue as much as his good qualities. That's why when you meet like those poor Russians seeing those Ukrainians, they don't know why they loathe them so badly. It wasn't in their book to do this. Karma ripens, you know. That's why we don't know why we hate some people. We don't know why we feel so dreadful sometimes. The karmic seeds are there. When you meet the condition, it arises. We're like little lemmings, you know. We're driven by the power of our past karma. So, of course, we've got lots of karmic seeds. That's why the idea of free will is a bit silly. You've got choice because you've got other options inside your mind. They will ripen as well. So then for me, at that time, no option came. The abortion happened really smoothly because of the strength of the karma of the fetus. All this is dependent arising. All this is dependent arising, you know. Causes, things have causes. That's when this is why it's such a powerful practice in daily life, because we all know we have the terrible suffering of people not liking us, people accusing us, people abusing us, people thinking we're lying, people thinking we're horrible, and we don't know why. No wonder we go crazy, because we don't know why. Why me is a valid question. Well, if you factor in karma, at least it's an explanation. That's what we're working with here, you know. Super powerful. And then the purification practice is a way to shift it. Zopa says we're insane not to do the 4 opponent powers practice every day. You first regret the rubbish of that day. You regret the things you did and said that hurt others. Why? Because you don't want the suffering. You don't want these karmic seeds to ripen in the future. You don't want the suffering. It's about you, compassion for yourself. Then you think, well, whom can I turn to? The Buddha's our doctor, so we use his methods. Then you have compassion for those you harmed. So let's just say if someone's mean at work to you, and you don't know why, and it's making you crazy, and all you're trying to do is get them to change their mind. But due to your past karma, they don't believe your words, due to your past lying. So what do you do with that? The very first step, regret, purifies the particular karma called experiences similar to the cause, which is exactly what's happening at work. The person is not believing your words, and you know you're telling the truth. So you regret whatever lying you did 47 lives ago, that is now ripening as this person not believing you. And don't be surprised, that shifts it. Because the fruit of your actions, and if you regret it and purify it, then it'll shift. This is very powerful. So the first is regret, then reliance and compassion. Then you do the practice of visualizing the particular way you can do it, you know, with that mantra and things, blah, blah, blah. And the fourth one is resolve not to lie again. So the experience is similar to the cause is all the stuff that happens to us, how people see us, how people treat us, including all the good. This is where, as Lama says, everything we experience in our life is our own karmic appearance. You don't see anything out there, nothing out there appears to you in any way without you having caused it from the past. So even just you walk down the street and two people are punching each other, how evil these people are, you'll say. Well, you must have created the cause to meet them, I'm sorry. They didn't sneak around, so we're going to jump in front of Robina and make her miserable. Due to your karma, you saw violence. One of the causes of being in a violent environment is past living around other violence is abusive speech, I think. Abusive speech or something like that. Everything you experience, environmental karma, experience similar to the cause or your tendencies, that's it. And that's applying emptiness by realizing it's a dependent arising. There's no set in stone, poor me, innocent victim, I don't deserve this. Or I do deserve the good, where is it? That's the hubris of attachment, which is rooted in ego grasping, which sees things as self-existent. So applying karma is a very dynamic thing. Not some kind of intellectual big stick that you use to beat yourself when you're naughty. It's a powerful way to loosen the grip of seeing things set in stone. And it puts you in the central, in the seat, in the driving seat. This is the result of my actions. So you own all the good stuff, delight in it every second, not sit on your laurels, and never waste it for 1 second. So if you get money easily, for example, don't just think, oh, aren't I clever? No. It's the fruit of your past non-stealing and your past generosity that enables you to get credit easily, to get good investments, to get good jobs. Don't just be arrogant. It's the fruit of your generosity. So that's why you've got to keep the generosity going, to keep putting petrol in the tank, Because we all see some people, their lives change. It all runs out. You keep generosity going and keeping your vows of non-stealing going, you'll keep nourishing those karmic seeds and they'll keep growing. Seeing everything as our own karmic appearance is a way of realizing emptiness, is a way of realizing dependent arising. Because karma is the first example of dependent arising. So all the teachings are all the way up to emptiness, the teachings of emptiness are implicit. Each stage has certain explicit teachings, but what's implicit is emptiness. Everything's rooted in dependent arising. If you're going to university to study physics, every track you take, every single class you take, physics is implicit, isn't it? It's leading you to physics. It's preparing your mind for physics. Everything in the Lam room is preparing your mind for emptiness and bodhicitta. It's all implicit. It's all integrated, like the course to become a physicist. It's all guided, it's all driven perfectly, all mapped out, leading your mind, priming your mind. Same here, same here. This is the method to get happy, and it's the method to eventually be a benefit to others. As you loosen the grip of ego grasping, you loosen the sense of a separate I, you connect with others. And it cuts fear. That's the one that's interesting. We think fear when you're like a heart is beating when a car nearly runs you over, or someone holds you up with a gun, and you have this panic attack, and then you have trauma, and then you have to, do all those things. Fear. But all the delusions are, because they're rooted in ego grasping, are rooted in fear. I mean, we don't think this way, but have a look at a person shouting and yelling who's angry. See that child having a tantrum. You'll hear all this stamping and you'll go, what's going on? Oh, she's just angry. Well, have a look at her. Her eyes are wide with horror, tears coming out, spit coming out the mouth, stamping, screaming, fists flailing, irrational words pouring out the mouth. She's having a total mental collapse. We just call it anger. What the hell do you think is going on? Look at the behavior. Her mind has gone berserk. Total panic. Total panic. Anger, because attachment's not getting what it wants. That's mental illness. We just take it for granted, Let me blame her mother. It's called anger. It's a mental illness. It's severely neurotic, unable to bear the smallest thing that went wrong. Some children have it so serious, and we should have incredible compassion for them. Look at the suffering. So all delusions are rooted in fear. So I love to tell the story of Lama Zopa. 2:46. What's the story here? Time goes so quick, doesn't it? 3 o'clock. We're going to do, okay, just to get us on track here. I've got to keep talking here, but eventually we're going to be giving people have requested refuge in the lay vows. We're going to do that at about 4 o'clock or maybe earlier. We'll see what happens, probably earlier. And I'll talk about it first. And we're going to spend the last 20 minutes of the teachings talking about refuge in the lay vows. So for those who don't want that, we can finish the class and you all say goodbye. Then you can, those who want to can stay on. It'll be like the last 30 minutes of the class, I'd say. Talking about refuge in the lay vows, answering questions, and then giving the ceremony, which is very short itself. So those who want to renew their refuge in lay vows are very welcome. And some people had asked to do for the first time, so they'll be doing that. So it's for 2:45. I know. We'll see how we go. Okay, are there any questions now, please? Lots of questions. Come on, questions, please, people. Are there any questions? Eileen, you got more questions?
Yeah.
Go. Eileen.
Yes, thank you, Robina. When you were talking about rebirth, taking rebirth through a particular mother's womb, as it were, you talked about karma ripening at the time of death. So is that ripening at the karma, is that all of it, your whole life, or what's going on in your mind at that moment? Because we can die in different ways, so.
Okay, so what's happening is every millisecond we're having an intention, and then we do actions with our body and speech driven by that intention and motivation and all the other bits and pieces of our mind. Each millisecond we're popping karmic seeds into our bank vaults, speaking simply. There's trillions of these seeds. Some seeds are complete seeds, which means they had what we discussed yesterday in terms of a complete action. And we should go more into this a bit, I think it's helpful. The complete action of, say, non-killing would be, one, there is an object there called a living being. Two, your mind involved in it, the intention not to kill or the intention to save that being, driven by the motivation called compassion, let's say. Three, you do the action of saving the mouse, and four, little happy mouse. That's a complete action of non-killing. So lots of complete actions of non-killing go into their particular bank vault, and those particular seeds are the ones that create will ripen as a human rebirth. So then at the time of our death, the time of Eileen's death, and the few weeks before she found her way to her mummy's fallopian tube, at the time as the death process started, the conditions of your death were the condition that enabled one of your virtuous non-killing karmic seeds to be triggered, which then programmed you already a few weeks later to find your way to Eileen's mother's human womb. So that was one seed. One seed was ripened as one rebirth. Now, within this life of Eileen, non-killing can also ripen as a tendency. It can ripen as an experience similar to the cause. So as long as you continue to live, you're not dead yet, Eileen. That means that's the experience similar to the cause of past non-killing is you don't die young, you don't get killed. So every millisecond that's a ripening, that's those non-killing karmic seeds ripening as an experience to stay alive. Every millisecond. And then the environmental result of non-killing is that the food and the food and the water and the soil and the environment nourish you and not harm you. So karma is ripening every millisecond, billions and billions of karmic seeds every second. But there is one seed that gives you the birth that you get. So if at the time of your past death, your killing tendency was triggered, then one of your killing karmic seeds was triggered and would have programmed you to go to the lion's womb instead.
Right, so that's why it's so important to do purification.
That's right, exactly.
Because there's so many negative seeds that have been.
That's right. And then also why it's so important to die well. Because when as Lama Zopa says in his book, How to Face Death Without Fear, which is a book I highly recommend.
Yeah, I have it.
I know it because I edited it, so I know it well. So in there, Rinpoche says you want to help anybody in this life when they need you most is at the time of your death, because this life's over. So now we have to help the person navigate this, going from this one to the next one. So that basically means to help the person be peaceful and virtuous at that time, because that enables a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered, because we've got millions in our bank vaults. So if the mind is freaking out and having a difficult time, that can trigger a negative karmic seed. And if the mind is peaceful, relatively peaceful at the time of death, that'll help trigger a positive karmic seed, because there's this natural relationship between, when we know that when your mind is freaking out, it triggers all your delusions, you know. When the mind is peaceful, it gives space for a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered, which programs your mind to get another decent human body so you can keep on moving on your spiritual path. You with me?
Yeah, I am.
Good, Eileen.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
Hang on a sec. Gina's got a question. Yes, darling.
I have a question.
Yeah, so I can hear you.
Sorry, last weekend, my ex-mother-in-law passed away, and it was an assisted suicide. I was not there, but I was told that she died beautifully, and I remember hearing that a suicide is creating quite a negative karma. So I'm curious.
Okay, so peaceful. So okay, peacefully. Was she conscious? She was conscious when it happened. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know what to say. Or like, I mean, I can't argue with that person's experience, but I can only tell you, let's look into this. Let's look into the components. Let's look into the different things that are there in the mind when we do actions. So the key factor that determines the character of an action that a person does, meaning the key factor that determines whether you label it negative or positive, which means the key factor that determines whether it leaves a negative or positive seed in the mind, and which means it's the key factor that determines whether the action is virtuous or negative in terms of the seed and how it ripens, is the motivation.
Right.
So in general, I can't talk that about experience. I've got no idea what to say, but we can discuss in general, can't we?
Yeah.
So in general,
And she was a practicing Buddhist as well.
I see. In general, okay, so I can't say about her motivation, I don't know. So in general, it seems to me, if we look into our minds, if we want to kill ourselves, in general, I don't think it's coming from bliss, joy, happiness, delight, compassion, virtue, in general. I think it usually comes from despair. From our experience of talking to people, that's why we think suicide's so sad, because you're despairing. You can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, that is not a virtuous state of mind. It's not judgment. It's a very despairing, unhappy. So it's ego grasping, very strongly grasping, and it's despair, attachment, anger, depression, whatever. So any action you do on the basis of that can only bring negative results. So I'm not saying it's not possible and I don't know about your experience. I cannot say that about that person, that it's not possible to take your life with compassion. You could argue a bodhisattva would happily do that because they've got no delusions. They could happily decide for the benefit of others, a virtuous reason to die and to take their life or something.
Right.
So I don't know about this person. Maybe they were a bodhisattva. Maybe they had a virtuous motivation and a virtuous motivation. So what was the motivation for this person to die? Did you know that? Did you know the story? What did they say?
3 years of living with cancer and was no.
Okay, so the pain was unbearable.
Pain was unbearable.
Okay, that's called aversion. That's aversion right there. That's not a happy mind, is it?
Yeah.
So unable to bear the pain anymore. That's not a happy mind. It's not being rude. It's just looking analytically, critically, clinically at the mind. If there's aversion, and aversion means you've got to stop this pain, that's not a happy mind. So I can't comment on they look peaceful. I'm not trying to prove any other thing. I'm just saying we have to analyze what's in the mind. So a mind that's spacious and open and joyful and compassionate, that's a virtuous state of mind. And any action done on the basis of that can only bring happy results because it's a virtuous state of mind. It's a natural law, not a judgment thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's true that their mind was peaceful when they died. I don't know that. It could have looked like. I'm not trying to even argue. I'm just talking about the way to analyze.
I know, and I try to follow and
Just to think of, just do the analysis, that's all. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes,
Would
Lana.
it be an act of self-compassion to?
What's self-compassion? What is self-compassion? No, what's self-compassion then? I mean, there's no definition of self-compassion in Buddhism because it's a term we use.
Okay,
What's self-compassion look like? What's this state of mind?
not wishing oneself to suffer.
That's called aversion.
Okay.
I mean, no, there's a difference. No. Wanting not to have future suffering, what that would cause you to do is to practice virtue. not wanting this suffering now and finding it unbearable. And indeed, suffering is unbearable. And I can imagine killing yourself from living in terrible physical pain. That is totally aversion. That is aversion, which is attachment, not getting what it wants. And that's what causes the incredible pain. This is not meant to be critical or judgment. I have to keep repeating that.
Right,
It's technical, it's clinical. That is not a virtue. It can't be. Do you understand me?
Yeah.
If you don't want future suffering, then you're going to give up the sugar now, which is quite painful. And that's virtue, because you don't want a future diabetes. If you don't want future suffering, you will stop immediately causing anything that would cause you future suffering, which means you'd only do an action based on virtue. Do you understand?
I know.
Of course, it's not difficult. It's not easy. My God, I can't believe it. I mean, I can't imagine the physical pain that some people have. It's unbearable. So that's not compassion. It's non-virtue. Do you understand? It's delusion. It's fear. It's totally fear, isn't it? But we can't help but hear this as judgment. This is our big problem. I have to say it 1,000 times. It's got nothing to do with judgment. Nothing to do, because no one's judging you. There's no one out there pulling the strings. There's no one out there bossing. There's no one out there punishing or rewarding. There's no boss, you know. These are things, this is just, they bring all thoughts and actions bring their own results, just naturally, logically. No one's running the show. Yeah, interesting point. What else, people? Who else here? Nobody. All right.
Thank you, Lama.
Yes, go. Yeah, I know. So, Jifra, go, darling. Yes, talk to me.
Hello, how are you?
Good, darling. Thank you.
So I have a question about experience similar to the cause.
You need to
So
talk
is-
again, sweetheart. It's a bit the noise. There's a bit crunchy voice.
Sorry. I had a question about experience similar to the cause.
Yes.
So is karma like very personal in this case, in the sense if people generally have a tendency of not liking you, would it be
Absolutely.
person to person, or would it
It's
be in
very
general?
personal, darling. It's very personal, because you can see that, because some people might really like us and we're the same person being friendly and chatty, and another person can't stand the sight of us. That's very, very personal. Yes, exactly, Jibba, which is very interesting. That's why it's so important not to make that as a weapon to beat ourselves up and think I must be inherently ugly, because we're not. Some people can't stand us and some people like us. That's why it's important to, if we really can't bear being around people who are mean to us, if we can change it, how marvelous. It's nice to be around people who like us, and we can get some space in our mind, you know, if we can have the choice of it, the control over it. Yeah.
So no matter what you do, they don't like you. So either you just change your mind or you change your company.
Change your mind, but also the impurification practice is quite powerful. Like I said, I mean, if you email me again and remind me of this, I'll send you the practice, because you did ask me at some point. I'll send it to you again. It's where you then regret whatever the harm is you did in the past. It causes this person to not like you now. And by regretting it and having compassion for them, they can help shift it, can help change.
Okay. Okay, sure. I'll write to you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good, good, good. Thanks, darling.
Thank you. Bye.
Yes.
So you could only purify whatever is manifested in the reality right now.
No, you can purify eons of negative seeds. They're all sitting there waiting. So every time you regret killing, and then you have compassion for those you killed, and then you do the practice, and then you vow not to do it again, you're putting atomic bombs under the tendency to kill, which is all the karmic seeds.
Do you need to go back into in time? Basically,
No, no, you wouldn't need to do that. Listen to me. Listen. Let's say you've been eating, M&Ms for 47 years, and you're now seeing the karmic result, the results of the bad nutrition. The moment you stop eating M&Ms, and the moment you then start eating food to counteract M&Ms, you don't have to remember every damn M&M you ate. It'll just purify all those. It'll fix you now. So it'll stop you from having to keep experiencing the fruits of M&Ms. It'll fix you now.
Yeah, I was asking because in the more subtle, in the subtleties of afflictions, like how depression comes to be. For example, let's say somebody is depressed and they have no clue why they're crying for a week. It's like, what is there to purify?
What?
At that time?
What is what?
What is there to purify when, like, that person cannot put the finger on like
It's, well, the
they
first
coming from.
regret. So then what we're experiencing now, whether it's as a tendency or as an experience, right, is the fruit of past causes, our causes. We programmed our mind with whatever those seeds were that are now ripening as that experience. So we don't remember what it is, it doesn't matter. But you strongly, the first step is you regret whatever I've done in the past that is now causing me to experience this. I regret it from the depths of my heart because I don't want futures. I don't want this suffering. And then you have compassion. Then you do the practice and then you vow not to do it again. So you put atomic bombs under those tendencies. If it were anger, whatever it is, you put atomic bombs on it. So there's, you know, you change it now. Do you understand or not?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So, okay. What's happening? More? Hello, Maywood. Just talk to me.
One quick question. Do
Yeah.
virtuous actions in this lifetime have any effect on the non-virtuous seeds that we sowed in
Like
the
atomic-
former lifetimes?
That's what practice is. That's exactly what practice is, darling. Every time you decide, I will not kill, every time you live in the vow of not killing, you're putting atomic bombs under the tendency to kill. Are you not? Right there.
So all those mice I didn't kill in my apartment in New York City was a good thing for me.
Right, exactly. Well done. Congratulations.
Okay.
So, you know, one way is to pull out the weeds themselves directly, which is really just consciously thinking, I will not kill, and living in a vow not to kill. And then you proactively want to help others and practice the virtue of non-killing and try to help lives and save people's lives. Then you practice virtue. So they all work together to change the habits in the mind.
Okay.
It's amazing. Absolutely, darling. Well, people, I think I've run out of words. What? Where? Who? When? Oh, hi, sweetie. Go on, go. Nadia.
So then how does it work with Pussycat? Needs to get euthanized.
Exactly.
You don't euthanize the cat, you take it to the vet. and
That's
it's
right.
in Kidney failure,
I know.
and the vet euthanizes. So
That's right.
is it their garden that's getting wrecked then, or yours?
No, it's both.
Right.
And then now karma's extra heavy because we get someone else to do it for us. So my abortion was I drove it.
Right.
But then I got the doctors and the nurses, and the poor things didn't do the job properly. So the poor little fetus suffered terribly, probably.
Right.
I mean, maybe the 12 weeks doesn't suffer too much. I don't know. So yeah. So then, but this is the interesting point about our little pussycats and dogs. Let's just discuss that for a minute because it's very
But
very
then you can't let them suffer.
No, but I'm going to discuss it. Let's just look into it another way, another perspective. Just take another perspective, not forcing. Okay. The key point about why the Buddhist approach would be to avoid consciously taking the life of yourself or someone else is simply the fact that we're not wise enough to know with confidence that a virtuous karmic seed will be triggered at that moment and ensure we get another decent human body. That's the point. The simple point is that it's not a moralistic issue. You're naughty, you shouldn't do it. It's simply a lack of wisdom. Do you hear my point now?
Yeah.
So if we had the wisdom, like I used that example yesterday of Lama Yeshe. We can assume here that Lama Yeshe had clairvoyance and compassion and wisdom and all these things, which they say we can get. He could see clearly the karma of this boy, this monk. You remember the story? He could see the mind. He actually had clairvoyance. Now, we don't factor that in the modern world. That sounds like hilarious, doesn't it? You understand? But let's assume it's a possibility. So because he could see clearly the mind of this monk and the karma he created that was the cause of this particular suffering, and that if he'd gotten a doctor, he would have gotten better, but he wouldn't have purified the whole karma, so next life terrible. Whereas, so because of that wisdom, he could see out of compassion that it was best for him to allow, not have a doctor. He suffered. You can't argue he did not suffer, but he died really well with his Buddhist approach to life, and he died really well, finished all the karma, and next life, fantastic. Now, in other words, it's only because we don't have the wisdom to see the certainty of what will happen next. So that doesn't mean you let your cat just suffer. There's lots of things we can do to mitigate the suffering. There's lots of things. I mean, even just recently, a friend of mine has a dog who's dying, and the vet said, you must kill it. And the vet said it's going to suffer terribly. And she's a bit of a Buddhist, you know. And I just gave her some, I said, I can't force, you know, I just give the options. And she sort of trusts what I say. So she decided she would start to just not kill the dog immediately and take care of the dog and not worry too much, because often it's our own fears. You know, we can't handle it. We panic. So she just then, and I mean, this is esoteric if we don't have all these Buddhist practices, but I sent her the link to Lama Zopa singing the Medicine Buddha mantra. And she said already immediate benefit. And this is something very interesting in Lama Zopa's book. Many of the practices he recommends to help dying people are the practice of listening to mantras and hearing things that have a much subtler effect on the mind at a deeper level, even when you're unconscious, you know. And so she said the dog was immediately perking up and his suffering was less and he was listening to the Medicine Buddha mantra, so she relaxed a bit. But the other thing, so then you do what you can. You make your doggy safe. You maybe give it a drug. You maybe have mantras playing, even when it's in a coma, it can be blessed by that. And that can bring according to the Buddhist view, it will bring the presence of the Buddhas, which will help the mind be peaceful. And when it dies, it'll hook it somehow. So there's different things to do it. And I think much of it is because we can't stand the pain and we feel like guilty and and we don't posit future lives. If there were no future life, please kill me right now if I'm suffering. Do you understand my point now? It doesn't, there's no, don't let me suffer, please. I'm ridiculous. Kill me immediately. It makes complete sense. But all we're doing is here taking the view that your consciousness continues. And the way the doggy's mind is at the time that the process starts, and there's all very specific instructions of how that happens, then at that time, you know, as much as you can. It doesn't mean that when you do kill the dog, that it mightn't get a good rebirth, in which case, good luck. But it's a bit like Russian roulette. So it's just out of lack of certainty that you don't, I mean, from us, there's two things also. One, you merely mean well. You have compassion. You really have compassion. So from your side, the action driven, you're killing your doggy out of compassion is okay for you karmically, right? But what about the dog? We don't think of that. We think because it was good for me, I meant well. So, but we don't consider what are the possibilities of the dog's rebirth. So we've got to have certainty we're going to kill the dog. So and I think there's lots of ways you can mitigate it and can make your doggy and your grandma peaceful, and so on and so on and so forth. It's not always perfect, but at least because of lack of wisdom is the real thing behind it. And there's lots of things you can do to help the person die peacefully.
That's clear.
Do you understand?
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, my feeling is we're sort of finished again. I'm always cheating you of time, 3:08. And we can start talking about, yes.
Oh, Benjamin, when you were talking earlier about fear and delusion and fear being linked, and I just thought, I don't make that connection. I always think the fear is out there.
What do you mean by fears out there? What do you mean by that?
So, like when I get fearful of, getting sick, or other people I love getting sick. And you were saying something about fear comes from delusion.
Yeah, of course.
And I thought, I don't really understand that, because like in my mind, I always think the fear is outside. Like it's
what you're meaning is the event is outside, but your fear is inside.
Yes, yes.
So that's attachment, sweetheart.
Yeah, okay.
That's attachment, darling. Attachment to not wanting your grandma to die. That's not compassion. Compassion is one thing for your dog, but the fear of what's likely to happen is very real for us. And that comes from attachment, because attachment only wants everything to be lovely. Attachment can't stand the thought something bad might happen. That's called attachment, honey, and that's a delusion.
So the fear is a derivative, again, of attachment.
Okay, fear. We say fear when someone really tries to kill you or you have a car accident and the panic starts. Anxiety, panic attacks, is called fear. But can you not hear how, look at that person who's angry, that child. If you're screaming, oh my God, mommy, he tried to kill me, she's evil, my sister tried to kill me, is that not having a panic attack? Is that not an extreme panic attack? Oh, she's just angry. What the hell do you think's going on in their mind? Look, when people are angry, you're completely living in a fantasy world of this monster harming you. Can you not hear that? So all delusions are rooted in the root delusion, and the nature, the character, the raw character of the root delusion is fear. So when you realize emptiness, there is no fear. You are blissful. Even if and this is why I'm going to tell the story of Lama Zopa. I think I'll finish with this story. I always tell this story. So Lama Zopa, and this is another advertisement. We're going up to his cave in October. I mentioned it before. And it raises money for Lama Zopa's cave. It's called Laudo. In his past life, Lama Zopa Rinpoche was was said to be this yogi up there, all these little people up in their caves up there. And when he was an old fellow, it's typical, he was a layman, and he used to go and trade salt back and forth between Tibet and Nepal, whatever, a Sherpa. And he was a meditator. And in the last 20, 30 years of his life, he moved this little kind of hole in the wall, and where they stored the radishes, I think, or the onions, I never know which. And he pulled them out and moved in. So Laudo means radish or onion. So he's known as the Laudo Lama, the radish Lama. So anyway, he meditated in that cave as this tantric yogi, meditated all his life, and then he died with complete control, which is these yogis can do, and they choose exactly their future life. They know exactly what's going on. They're in charge of the process. So anyway, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, when he's born about 44, same year as me, I think, about then. And he, as a little boy, because his sister, sometimes she runs the place now up there. When we go up there, we're going in October. She's 80, I think now, easily 80, and she's amazing. Has worked for 60 years up there, taking care of the place, looking after it for all the tourists and planting all the potatoes and going up and down the mountains. Her knees are completely wrecked now. So anyway, I interviewed her because I'm supposed to be writing Lama Zopa's biography. So I was interviewing her, and the stories of anyway about how when little Zopa was a little boy, Lama Zopa, he was 6. She was about 6 when he was born. So he's very unusual where he behaved. He always sat on high boxes. He always acted like a lama. He'd have, when he played games, he always acted the role of the lama. He'd have mud pie dodges and mud pie bells, and he would, and he'd talk about his benefactors coming to the puja. He talked about he named all the benefactors from the past life of the Laudo Lama. So, and as soon as his mummy would turn her back, little Zopa's gone, even when he could only crawl, they'd find him crawling with his little bare bottom up the mountain to where they knew the Laudo cave was. And then even from the time he could talk, he'd be trudging up the hill, come home, they'd say. He'd say, no, that is my home. So he showed the indication, like a lot of these yogis who choose their rebirth, they don't lose their memories. They know exactly who they are, and they want to carry on the job, So by the time he was about 8, he got they checked with the local lama. And he was said to, the divinations indicated that he was the reincarnation of the Laudo Lama. So he was sent off to the mountains at some point, someplace 8 hours up. And he tells a story about how that was about 1952 or something. He was about 8. And there was this big river, and the rivers up there are really intense, and they have these little rickety bridges across the rivers. So he saw this strange people across the river. There were these pale eyes, he said, straw-colored hair. It sounds like Swedish people, doesn't it? It was white. It was white people. He hadn't met white people before, and he wanted to meet them. So he bought a bowl of potatoes. You don't go empty-handed if you visit a guest. You invite someone. So he went across the bridge with his bowl of potatoes, and he fell in the water. Well, of course, they don't teach them swimming up there. And he's drowning. And this is how he told the story. He said, this is years ago. He tells it in different ways. He said, the head, not I, came to the surface. The head came to the surface. And he said he could see his manager, this monk, panicking, running up and down the bank, having a panic attack, losing this little Rinpoche. And he said, it occurred to me that the person known as the Laudo Lama is about to die. And then he said, I didn't know anything about emptiness, which of course he meant in that life, in the 8 years he's been living, he had never heard the words about emptiness. But he said, there was no fear. So analyze this. This is the point that Buddha's making. It's kind of outrageous when you think about it. So we know, I think wasn't it Mr. Darwin? I always think it was Mr. Darwin, so tell me if I'm wrong. He's the one who came up with this concept of instinct for survival, I think, and observe all the animals, and you see them all running, and you know that they're having a panic attack and they're running away from danger. I mean, they're not jogging, okay? I always remember how we how we fantasize all these animal shows. I remember one time, one animal show, one of those, an English fellow, he's about 100 by now, and he's still going. What's his name? Attenborough, yeah, Attenborough. And I love that man. He, this one particular show, there was this beautiful music, and there was a sunset, and it was a distant shot, and it was all the animals running. And of course, it looks romantic, and I thought, well, what are they doing? They're not jogging, I realized. They're not jogging, they're running in fear. So then we assume, because we do see the evidence of fear in all beings, when we're attacked, the evidence is there that we all have a panic attack, freak out. So we naturally assume it's a normal part of a normal person, and we assume that you need that fear to alert you to danger. That's how our analysis, isn't it? Well, Buddha says it's a mistake. You need intelligence to alert you to fear, dear. So if we think of it this way, Lama Zopa had clearly realized emptiness in a past life because he was able to navigate a new rebirth. He remembered who he was, blah, 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 whatever. Let's assume that. So he had no fear because he had no ego grasping. He had no attachment. He had no aversion. He had no dramas, none of the delusions. The delusions had gone. He only has virtue and wisdom. So he's recognizing, the thought occurred to me, the person known as the Laudo Lama is about to die. So we assume without fear, he'd sink to the bottom of the river like a stone and go, oh, well, I'm drowning. No, you would have seen a little boy coming to gasp for air. But this is the part that's shocking. His mind would have been as clear and as peaceful as if he'd walking along the river, kind of alert, but no delusions. So no fear. So if he had drowned, he would have drowned fine. He would have died happily, but he didn't drown. So this is impossible for us to comprehend because it does not exist in our neuroscientific views of the world. It's very simple. This is the Buddha's view. I mean, I think this is wonderful. I can't wait to realize emptiness. I can't wait to be beyond fear. But it's not, you don't get it overnight. As you lessen attachment and anger and jealousy, you get less fear. You get less anxiety. You become more hopeful, more confident, more relaxed, more easygoing, more reasonable, more sane. This is the point that Buddha is telling us, but it's so hard, we're as thick as posts. We can't hear it.
But Robina, do you think part of even having a tiny bit of fearlessness is having confidence that I will continue? Like even
having what? Sorry, what?
You know, that at least from the Buddhist perspective, you know, my consciousness will continue, like I will have another birth, whatever that is. But isn't that just subconsciously we all believe we won't exist?
I'm sorry, I really don't understand, darling. Say the point again.
So I'm trying to understand, like even now at this level of hearing the teachings, to generate even a tiny bit of fearlessness in my mind.
You don't generate fearlessness. You give up delusions, and then you get fearlessness. Don't dramatize it.
Okay,
Sweetheart, fearlessness is what comes as a result of getting rid of delusions.
Okay.
So what's your point about rebirth?
So is the delusion because I'm
What delusion, darling? Which delusion are you talking about?
I think all of them, but so this delusion that even though I believe intellectually that after I die, I will continue and have another identity or another birth.
So then go on. What's the question about that?
But I wonder if it's because I don't really believe it and I believe I'm just going to die.
So what's the question, darling? I beg you to please ask me the question. I need a question. I'm sorry.
Is that the basis of the fear?
I have no idea what you're saying, and you have to tell me again. Ask me a simple question. Try and do that.
So
what's the simple question?
Where is the fear coming from? I guess
ego grasping.
Okay.
Attachment, anger, panic, jealousy, drama queen. It's a function of believing in things that don't exist. No wonder there's fear. You believe there's a person coming around the corner. You live in fear. It might be true, but it's mostly if we live in fantasies. We have conspiracy theories all day in our mind. What if this happened? What if that happened? If only this, maybe that, therefore this, maybe that, maybe that'll happen. I mean, that's how we live our lives. And when we believe that story, we live in panic and fear. When you have no delusions, you have wisdom and clarity, and you're in touch with what exists, and it's virtuous and goodness, and you don't have fear, and you're dealing with reality. Can you hear that?
Yeah. We
live in fantasy worlds. We can continually live in what happened in the past, if only this and he that and she this and this. Then we anticipate all the future and we think it's all just good luck and bad luck, and it's all just cross your fingers and hope for the best, and no one knows what's going on. No wonder we live in fear, having no logic and no reasons for why things happen. Why do the Russians kill the Ukrainians? No one knows why. We haven't found it yet in the West. You can't blame God. I'm just talking, just Buddha's view. Don't have to like it, want to like it or dislike it. But fear, okay, if you have believed for all your life that $50 is 500, you see 500 now, you're so believed it, and you believe it's 500, and you have all this anticipation of spending 500, and you go and you spend it and you get 50 every time, you will be bitterly disappointed. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Then no wonder you live in fear, because you're grasping at fantasies. And that's how we've been living our lives. It's why we have delusions and why we have fear. What it says. It's a shocking way to think. It's not how we talk about it. You know? So to think that Lama Zopa Rinpoche didn't have fear as he was drowning is too impossible for us to consider. You see, because we assume it's a normal part of a normal person.
Yeah.
We don't have this analysis. Do you understand?
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, darling.
How did he get out of the river?
I don't know. His probably his manager helped him. He maybe jumped in and got him, you know.
The Swedes.
Yeah, that's right. Must be the Swedes. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. That's right. Exactly. Yes, darling.
Where does our responsibility?
Start again.
Where does our responsibility as an observer lie? If we see, for example, a man beating a woman.
Yeah,
On
absolutely.
the street.
Yeah, exactly.
This happened to me a number of months ago.
Yeah.
And we got the car and started yelling.
Yeah.
And saw me.
Who started yelling?
I started yelling at the car.
Oh, okay.
I thought no one saw.
Okay.
What then? So if this is my karma to see this,
That's right.
What is our
It's,
role?
it's just called, so there's the wisdom wing,
Mm.
which is working on yourself,
Mm.
getting rid of your delusions, becoming more content, more full, more wise, and therefore more connected to others. And then you proactively work on the compassion wing, which is you do what you can whenever you see suffering to stop it. But it has to be informed by wisdom.
Mm.
So if you don't, you can want to help. If you could go to Ukraine tomorrow,
Mm.
please go, I'll pay your fare.
Mm.
But we know much of the suffering we see, there's very little we can do to help it. So what do? We do what we can about what we can do. So if there are two people who are fighting, often might happen is they might tell you to go away and mind your own business and keep fighting. Depends. But if you have to want to have the courage to help, but you have to have the wisdom to know how. And the wisdom to be confident that what you do will help. Are you hearing me? So our responsibility is to help people. Of course it is, darling. It's called compassion. But you can't always help.
The extent to which you can.
Huh?
It's the extent to which you can help.
And that's the wisdom that informs what's the wise thing to do here. Because you might try to stop somebody doing something and you end up making it worse. We don't know. So, but to have the courage to leap in, that's good. Nothing wrong with that. That's wonderful. But it mightn't always work. So we have, of course, we have that responsibility. But if you're living in your own fears and your own dramas and you're terrified of you getting hurt as well, you'll become paralyzed. That's because we haven't done the wisdom work enough. So the more we work on our own mind, the more content and fulfilled and wise we become, and then we can see what we can do to help others according to our capacity. Do you understand? Does that answer your question? Good. Yes, darling. Hello, Jacqueline. Talk to me.
Hi. On the point of the woman asking about pets and euthanizing, I went through 3 animals, taking them through the death process because I didn't want to bring them to the vet. And I had mantras reciting and pictures of the Buddha, but at different times during their death process, they did go through screaming. And it's really, I felt like, did I make the right decision and not bring them to the vet?
You don't give them painkillers?
No, well, it was an immediate thing with the last one, and we couldn't bring her anywhere. But I was reciting mantras, I had images, but I just wanted to ask about the karma that was ripening for the animal as they were dying, screaming and then calm, and then screaming and then calm, and then my reciting mantras. Hopefully that.
I don't know. Okay, we know that suffering exists, and we know we can do everything we can to try and prevent suffering. But we can see sometimes we can't prevent suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So all you can do is do what you can, try and be as kind and compassionate as possible to your animals.
Mm-hmm.
And all these things of the mantras and stuff, if you have confidence in that will help their mind at a subtler level. What we can do is know that even if you did kill them, because it will stop the screaming, that doesn't mean then this is where it's not as if by helping them, you guarantee they're going to take a human body. It's only because we don't have the wisdom to know confidently. Mm-hmm. So we do what we can to support, do what we can to help people who are suffering, not suffering. All we can do is do what we can. I'm not saying or shouldn't,
Yeah, because I've heard different people in the Buddhist sphere mentioning that they're not sure if you let the animal live out its own karma. and let them die on their own.
Nothing of making it too complicated. First of all, we have this obsession that we can control everything. We're acting like we're God. We figure we've got the right to make someone suffer, we've got to not suffer, and we've got the right to kill. We're trying to sort of run the universe. We can't strangle life to death. We can't be guaranteeing that we can make everything nice. That's our own obsession, our own attachment, our own neurosis. So all we can do is use what wisdom we've got to help sentient beings.
And I try.
I can hear that. But just because your animal screamed in pain doesn't mean you did the wrong thing.
Okay.
Can you see the fundamental reason behind it is because if you have, like Lama Yeshe, if you had the wisdom to see the karma of that monk with crystal clarity, and we have to take that as a given, then he had the wisdom to know it was better for the monk not to have a doctor. Now who has that wisdom, Jacqueline?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a question of letting it live out its karma, all these fancy words. If we don't know, so then we do all we can to support our grandma, the pussycat, and everybody else. All we can do is that. We can't do more. We can't guarantee a good result.
Mm-hmm. So we can't guarantee a good result for their karma, even if they are euthanized, or if we let them die on their own.
Of course you can't. If you're not clairvoyant,
Yeah.
you can't.
Okay.
Of course not, darling. But if you have confidence, I mean, this is where it's difficult for us. If you have confidence in the concept of the Buddhas and the mantras and the presence of the holy beings, and all that, then it certainly will make a difference, will help their minds. That can help their minds. That's up to individuals. I can't force a person to believe that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The major thing here is we've got to look at our own fear and our own panic. And then guilt if we dared the cat screams, so then we feel guilty, we allowed it to suffer. And that's very strong. Like your vet will shout at you, your friends will shout at you. So we get all this kind of make it all complicated. Do you understand?
Yes. No, I mean, I was okay with that. I mean, I'm okay with seeing death and taking them through and trying to do as much as I can to help them. But it was terrifying when the first time I saw this happen, because I couldn't do anything. And I just tried to do whatever I could to recite mantras.
Spirits and things. Was it looking like incredible fear?
Yeah. I mean, and this is something that the doctor did tell me that could happen. All these things that we don't want to see. And that we're afraid to see.
Could happen. What do you mean?
Well, what the animal goes through in the process of dying.
It depends on the animal. So was it physical pain or was it some kind of
Oh, yeah. No, it was physical pain. I mean, it was writhing and moving, and then I would just hold her and talk to her, and it would calm down. And then finally, it was just those processes that I didn't expect. And it happened with all three of our animals.
I understand, yeah.
So, but I just didn't know if I won't euthanize because of just karma. But as you say, we don't know because we don't have that wisdom.
All we can do is do our best to alleviate the pain of sentient beings. That's all I can say.
Mm-hmm.
That's all we can do. We can't get it perfect. Hello, Apita.
Thank you.
I just have one question. Is it possible to change your residence where you've lived for 25 years without going through pain and suffering? If you have to change for your betterment.
Attachment, yes. Give up attachment, darling.
How would you do that? Like, what would I pray?
The entire path of the Buddhist practice, it takes count. It's the entire path, darling. There's no magic. But think about but another one is think about impermanence. Think about things change. You know, your house could burn down. You'd be forced to give it up, wouldn't you? So just sort of trick your mind into thinking. Or another way to trick your mind is like think that the next house might even be better. You trick your mind.
Yes.
Stand up, Peter.
Yes. Okay. I will work on that.
Think that one, and then just be. And then I mean, is that what you have to do? You got to leave your house, do you?
Yeah. It's for my betterment, for my health.
It's what?
So I have to go from a colder climate to a warmer climate. That's what the doctor wants me to do.
Okay. Well, then, so then you've got a trick attachment, which is a fear of losing something, and you've got to use attachment to look forward to something new. So trick yourself.
Okay.
Do that one. All right.
Okay, I will.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, listen, I think we should finish. I think enough about the mind and how it functions, and noticing the delusions and realizing we get rid of them all, and we can be blissful and happy, and then we can get compassion, be even more blissful and more happy and more courageous and more marvelous, and all that's our potential. So just sort of look into it, go one step at a time, try and see reality, see the delusions cause us to live in la land, attack them when we see them, try to hear their story, know how they project misconceptions, know how the misconceptions, how they project unreality. That's the key thing to really observe. Not to mention the pain and suffering they cause, how they're all rooted in fear. And do our best, one step at a time. So I'm going to talk about refuge now. So if people want to finish the class, we'll just do a little mandala offering, Sheila, isn't it? And those who want to go home can go home. And those who want to stay on to for another 30 minutes to listen to refuge and lay vows and do the ceremony, you're very welcome. So maybe we should just decide, those who want to go home can go home now, right? You want to go home, some of you? Not interested in refuge and... No, darling, I'm just trying to work out who wants to stay. Who wants to stay to hear about refuge in the lay vows? You don't have to. And the rest of you can go home, right? Okay, so we finish. And those you can go home. I mean, you don't have to go home. You can stay. You're very welcome. So we'll just do that now. So we're going to finish. Sheila wants to do this little practice of offering a mandala to thank for the teachings, okay? Just do it, keep it really simple. So you're going to do the trip, are you? Yeah. Okay. So we're going to, this is very Tibetan style. We're going to hand over certain things to me. And one, it looks like 10-pin bowling, but it's the representation of the universe, surprise, surprise, offering that. And then we're going to offer representations of enlightened body, speech, and mind for us to create the course for us to achieve enlightened body, speech, and mind. So we can benefit sentient beings. So who's going to sing?
Brown, with perfume,
yeah,
strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and moon. Imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land.
Next
May
one.
my venerable Lama's health be firm, white divine action spread in the 10 directions. May the torch of the teachings of Losang always remain, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms.
Put your hands down. Down. Off. Away. Thank you. Now poke your head at me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, darling.
Venerable.
Thank you, kind people. Thank you, dearest one. Oh, you're the wrong cutter. That's okay. That's fine. Put it there. Okay, you people.
Okay.
And then we dedicate. We think. Okay, we think. All these seeds we planted by listening. Just as soon as we listen, pops the seed in, programs us. So be happy with that. We might remember 99% of it. Doesn't matter. So all these seeds we planted, delight in this, be happy. Just 2 delicious days, 2.5 days of hard work, hard gardening. All these seeds we planted, maybe nourish them from this moment forward with our practice, continue to work on our minds, continue to work on our body and our speech, see our delusions, recognize how they're causing pain, see how they're misconceptions, chat away, work away, programming. Develop our marvelous potential, develop our virtuous states of mind for our sake and the sake of others, and make compassion. By bodhicitta, grow and grow in the hearts of all. Jangchob, Semcho, Grimpoche, Ma Kie Panam Ke Guchig, Kie Panyam Pa Me Pa Yang, Gong Ne, Gong Du, Baba Shog. And may the Dalai Lama and all the holy beings, Lama Zopa, all those people, may all the ones who are representing these teachings on the earth, who are living them, may they live long. The world needs them badly. And may we live long if we're going to be practicing, benefiting the world as much as we can, ourselves and others. And never give up, never give up, never give up. That's the main thing. Thank you, people. So those who want to go home, you may go home. And those who want to stay, you may stay. We'll be about 20 minutes total. But I've got to just